Okay, this is a microphone test for Danny. Georgie, go ahead and talk at the same time. How are you doing? How's DC?
I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Same way you hear on TV.
So we're talking at the same time. This is my volume. This is Georgie's volume. Go ahead and talk again, Georgie.
Yep, mine is slightly above middle, so hopefully I don't sound like a crackhead.
And then bring that microphone just slightly closer, if at all possible.
A little closer?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Okay, everybody,
Okay.
How is my volume? How is Georgie's volume? Please let us know in the chat. Thank you so much. We're muted. Okay, we are live. Georgie Dinkov, how are you, sir?
Hey, I'm fine. In the middle of the riots, everything's fine here. Holding up, hanging in there.
Yeah, not to go too down a rabbit hole, but how are things in DC? I was telling you before we started here that I keep forgetting that DC is like the epicenter of everything.
My office, where I'm recording this right now, actually not recording, but when we're doing the live broadcast, it's a block from the White House. So there are military vehicles everywhere. There's police everywhere. Pretty much like anything within 4 to 5 block radius from the White House is being shut off. You can't have vehicles. People are allowed to walk, but around me on the street when I was walking towards the office, there were the ratio of cops plus military to pedestrians was like 10-1. So things are peaceful, but you can sense the tension. Last week was pretty bad. There was you could tell because helicopters are flying throughout the night to the point where you can't even sleep. You can see windows being broken. That sound but now seems to be more or less settled down. There's still protests, but they're sitting in front of the White House and they don't seem to be doing much. Just like it's kind of like a sit-in, more of a sit-in than real protest, than an actual demonstration where people move around and break things and clash with the police.
And have you seen a de-escalation of the coronavirus stuff since the rise of the protests?
Actually, it's almost forgotten. There are people wearing masks. They're part of the protest, but honestly, everybody's mind is now on this. And actually, little by little, I'm kind of hearing conversations saying oh my God, so we suddenly stopped caring about the virus. Everybody went about their way. They're not really following any of the rules. And the world is not falling apart. It's not ending. So what was that all about? Kind of starting to hear these conversations what was that all about?
Yeah, to be fair, nobody, neither you nor I nor anybody I know would have predicted this would have happened. But it's a really shocking that you see the some of the newscasts that say some of the health experts say that you should still stay at home unless you're protesting. It's just what? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Well, at least the people that I'm seeing on the street, the majority of them are not wearing masks. And basically, there's definitely no maintenance of the social distancing. These crowds cluster together in order to oppose, if nothing else, to oppose the police. When the police forms a line and tries to push back, these protesters don't stand a chance if they're standing 6 feet apart. So they cluster together and they push back, right? Even those people, most of them, from what I see, are not wearing masks. So at this point, I think little by little, I think people right now are too busy with the other stuff to actually start saying, this was ridiculous. How could we fall for this completely ridiculous narrative? Their mind is on something else right now. But when that thing calms down, if it does, I think you're going to start seeing some more serious, I don't know, like not political movements, but like there will probably be some kind of a movement that will say, hold on, what did just happen, and why did we fall for this? Just like they're trying to hold the police responsible, I think they may try to do something about that virus as well. And which kind of explains why probably the news media is now not saying anything about the virus, because they don't want to bring it up in this situation. They're just hoping everybody will forget and just move on.
Well, I did read 2 days ago that they were talking about it, like outbreaks increasing. And so again, I wonder if we'll be like subjugated to it coming back or something, like I think we talked about this a few weeks ago, but that'd be horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, but like if you look at the projections and the waves that they do for the flu, this is done every year. I mean, there's no defined flu season. It's just a specific portion of the year when people are more susceptible, and you get to see more cases and more people end up in hospital, mostly because of their low vitamin D and lack of light during the winter, right? There's no mystery. Well, to us, I mean, like, and actually, you do see some studies that are saying, hey, is the flu simply like a vitamin D deficiency annual syndrome or something like that? These questions are already being asked. But now, if you look at the projections that they have for the coronavirus, they're not that different from the projections that are being done from the flu. And many experts are now saying, you know what? So, sorry, the original models were wrong. But guess what? You should be celebrating because we were wrong. Well, and so far it flies, but let's see for how long.
Good stuff. We could probably talk about this all day. Guys, go ahead and give this episode a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and I will announce the winner of, we've been not announcing regular winners, which is my fault. But DBO514 for his monumental effort in just being useful in the chat, the comment section, you have won a bottle of Tocovit, so I appreciate that. And then we'll pick another winner next time you and I do a live stream. And so, again, like this episode, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. And then something that should be noted, I know we talk about this fairly frequently, but like this is totally grassroots, user-supported show. I make money on my coaching. You make money because you have a real job and you do the supplements, but nothing's being exchanged between us. And then also like I've whined about this many times, but like YouTube is clearly not favoring our content. For example, if you type in Ray Pete, the interviews with him do not show up when you type in Ray Pete into YouTube. And again, I know that's our fault. We're talking about things that YouTube does not like. But again, if you value this content, if you comment or you like the episode or you subscribe to the channel, that's helpful for us, basically, if you care. Also, effort has been put into the audio quality. It's like devastating to me to find out that an episode has bad audio quality after the fact, especially those Ray episodes. And I was telling Georgie that before we jumped on here. Another bit of news is I'm working on getting all the episodes on a podcast aggregator. I resisted it for a long time because, again, the audio quality was pretty bad for some of the episodes. And so I didn't think somebody would want to listen to a bad sounding live stream audio for 2 hours, but apparently a lot of people do, so I will work on that. And then the last thing is, I can't speak for you, Georgie, but I think we have like a prerogative to move towards whatever we believe is true, and I think you and I are both similar in that if that is shocking to some people or upsetting to some people, that's not necessarily going to stop us from chatting about it. And so, especially with those Ray ones, I think we get to topics that some people get like shocked or upset by, but for what it's worth, I think it's all in an effort to find some kind of truth or uncover bits of reality. And I've never talked to you and thought that you were caged by cultural norms. Ray called it the religious cultural cage. I think you're a very free thinking person. And
I used to be. But I had my come to Jesus. I know it sounds bad, but like it's kind of like Jesus walking away and then saying, "You're on your own, kid." And Yeah, that's pretty much when my journey started, I would say.
But yeah, this a long-winded way of saying, navigating to truth wherever that will take us, and not being.
By the way, I'm not an atheist because I do get these questions.
Mm-hmm.
I wanna stress that I am actually pious in a sense, but just as Ray said, I found out that the many religious doctrines have been created most likely with a very nefarious purpose in mind, namely to control and basically keep people believing whatever is good for a small cluster of very twisted minds. There is a God, but that God is right in front of us. There's no need. I think in one of the interviews you asked him so if there is a God, he's right in front of us. It's the world, it's this reality, this constant process of creation. That would be God. And Ray said, yeah, if you have to jump to some remote place where they put God, namely the religious authorities, then you're not there, right? So it's not really something that's real. And if you want to believe in things, you might as well believe in something that's real. And to him, it was about process theology, the constant process of creation, which, by the way, many scientists have thought about this idea. David Bohm, the physicist, is probably the one who is the most famous for saying that life is a constant process of creation and should be lived as if it was like a seance of art, as if you're painting something, continuously. You're participating in the constant creation of the world. So no need to put your faith in something that's completely remote, out there, untouchable, invisible, and incomprehensible. It's right in front of you.
Somebody says Danny is calling Georgie a barbarian. So that's not. That wasn't my point. I was just saying
the Bulgarian barbarian.
I was just saying we like if some people were shocked that we didn't subscribe to the what was happening via the view of CNN. And so, again, I think that might be shocking to some people. So I'm just saying we're going to navigate to areas that might make people uncomfortable. And I'm just saying we're doing that because you and I suspect that's the only way we can do it. I just share what I'm interested in automatically. It's not something I even think about,
And also, I've learned to grow deeply suspicious whenever somebody is immediately opposed to something just because it's novel.
Yeah.
And actually, that many times, more often than not, is due to metabolic deficiency, because that's actually people become hostile to change with age universally. That's not a coincidence, mostly because in order to handle change, to incorporate it, you need the energy, right? But sometimes this hostility takes in the form of projection to other people as well. It's it's okay to not like change in your own life. I mean, it's not okay, but it's understandable, right? It's your life. You decide what to do with it. But then you start getting annoyed when other people are continuously unearthing these annoyingly new things, and that's not okay with me. To me, that's an essential part of life, and for as long as I have the energy, I'll continue to do it.
Yeah, I think we've said that before, but when somebody says, no, do not do that, it almost makes me want to talk about it more,
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially if there's evidence for it. I mean, so sometimes it's simply the contrarianism, but sometimes it's look, there's all this evidence, and just dismissing it altogether because it's new or crazy. That's the other thing, right? I'm not going to do that. I like reading these things that are not part of the norm. You cannot grow if you just keep staying in your comfort zone. Who was that? Wasn't it John Lennon who said that life starts where your comfort zone ends, or something like that?
I've heard that before. I don't know if it was John Lennon.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, before we get too far, let me make sure my scene switchers are working. Okay, follow Georgie on Twitter, twitter.com/hateit. To like this episode, go to ideallabsdc.com. That's Georgie's supplements company, boutique supplements. Follow me on t.me/Danny Roddy for my Telegram, Twitter, Danny Roddy, and I do coaching at dannyroddy.com/resources. Okay, we'll jump into, did you have a preference for the first article that we talk about?
Let's see. I guess the first one will be, at this point, people know that I'm partial to DHT, but I thought it was a pretty good pretty good article, even though it's epidemiological. It basically showed that once you get diagnosed with prostate cancer, the higher your DHT levels, the lower the risk of you dying. So keep in mind, the vast majority of therapies for prostate cancer currently are aimed at obliterating your DHT levels. Mm-hmm. And now they've extended this to any androgen, right? But DHT is still the target. And this article just goes into the face of it. And if you look at the popular press that's covering this release, they reached out to some known oncologists and urologists, and the reaction was like, "No, it's just statistical fluke. I cannot comment on that." They all agree. And then of course a few of them call it controversial, which to me is a signal that this is probably on the right path. If not 100% right, it just as Ray said, there's no evidence that directly implicates DHT as a cause of prostate cancer. It's all a house of cards, and it's collapsing.
From what you've read, did they even propose a mechanism of how DHT causes prostate cancer?
Yeah, it's the stupidest, most simplistic thing, because androgens are known to increase the size of androgen-sensitive organs, such as the penis, the prostate, and what did they say? They give the seminal vesicles. And then I said, okay, I don't know. Why don't you guys start talking then about penile cancer? Why am I not seeing articles about penile cancer being caused by DHT? That is also a very highly that's also an organ that's highly sensitive to androgens, just like the prostate, right? It is one of the targets of DHT. And people with very low DHT, they're known to have micropenis, right? Why am I not seeing articles and theories and whatnot saying that penile cancer is caused by DHT? Silence, crickets. Like, there's just, if anything, the answer is like, stay in your lane. You don't know how these things are. Okay, but I know a person with penile cancer, and steroids were never ever discussed, never brought up. Speaking of steroids, he has gynecomastia. So I said, well, think about it. Like, so you have penile cancer, and basically they cut it out, right? And then basically like your gyno exacerbated because of all of these therapies you were on, and now this thing came back. Like, hasn't the doctor and you had the gyno even before, hasn't the doctor made any connection between these two? No, the doctor says, one thing's got nothing to do with the other, it's just local, and that's how it is. So anyways, but the one person that I know, and I'm saying this, it's not a coincidence because I have looked into this, there is a very strong link, epidemiological, already established between estrogen, prolactin, and penile cancer. So yeah, these are the true growth hormones for cancers in those organs, those areas, not DHT. DHT is a heavily differentiating hormone. Remember the discussion about the snails? It actually helps you restore your proper shape, not revert back to something more primitive that the only thing is capable of is division and growth.
Yeah, in the Constance R. Martin Endocrine Physiology, I think 1985, it's a book that Ray mentioned, but I think it's a she. She says that estrogen is among the best known growth hormone. And so it's that we've talked about it maybe the first episode, but everything being shifting a person towards that reduced state of growth or towards that oxidative state of differentiation, and that characterized by the NAD and NADH ratio.
Yep. And they there was a post which we may have discussed maybe a few months ago. It is on the blog. It showed that finasteride can actually cause hypothyroidism by lowering DHT, even in the presence of normal levels of thyroid hormone. So DHT, conversely, DHT actually, because they did the opposite, they actually administered DHT to see if these symptoms will be reversed in animal model, and it was. So DHT is a heavily pro-metabolic hormone. Anything that is pro-metabolic is highly unlikely to cause cancer, because cancer by definition is the reversal of metabolism. I mean, it has very high metabolism, but the primitive one. So anything that stimulates the highly sophisticated and differentiated oxidative phosphorylation, it's evolutionary quite unlikely to be causing any type of cancer.
Good stuff. Any preference for another article?
Let's see. A third of Americans show signs of clinical anxiety and depression.
I was just going to say that one was good.
Well, it's not a reason to laugh, but the reason I'm laughing is that now the popular press is saying it's not just the millennials, it's not just the Generation Z, it's everybody. And this is the reason I like this one is because it shows signs of clinical anxiety and or depression. This means that 1/3 is clinically mentally ill. And by the way, 1/3 is 1/3 that basically they managed to get to. And also these studies, they have an implicit bias, because I'm already publishing studies, and I've already learned to walk the ropes of politics in publishing studies. This study is probably kind of underestimating on purpose what the real toll is. In all likelihood, based on the other studies that I posted, Generation Z up to 75% may be mentally ill. So I think the real percentage is actually 50% or north of that. But I mean, the reason I'm posting is that now, of course, the excuse is that, oh, this is because of the virus. No, I don't think the virus will suddenly plunge 50% of the country into clinical anxiety and depression. There's got to be more than that, and we've seen signs of that. They're trying to excuse with the virus just as they're trying to excuse the financial crisis. But a few bloggers have already, not bloggers, but like a few finance experts are already starting to write articles saying like, no, financial crisis actually started in September of 2019. Remember that repo crisis in New York City when the banks couldn't borrow and there was like a liquidity issue, and then the Fed kept saying, no, everything's under control, everything's under control. Well, the Fed poured more money into the financial system between September 2019 and November 2019 than over 3 years of the financial crisis of 2008. So the financial crisis was very much underway, and it probably actually was ending by the time the virus hit. So same thing here. We've been seeing this evidence over the last at least 5 years. I mean, you and I started doing this podcast in 2015, right?
Yeah, I think.
I remember every once in a while, even back then, we would bring this up, and it was just starting to trickle. And then since then, not only has not stopped, but more and more studies are coming out, and more studies are saying it's the youngest that are hit the hardest. You probably remember like this post that what I said, the young have now become the old. And the reason I worry about this is that just as they kept saying that, we need to quarantine because the healthcare system cannot handle all of these people showing up simultaneously. Well, guess what? The healthcare system also cannot handle the idea that the young will need as much medical help and access to medical resources as the old. It's a type of an insurance system. It's based on the presumption that the old will be occupying the hospitals and doctors and whatnot, and the young will be mostly healthy, mostly going about their business and earning money and paying taxes and supporting the old. If now we're in a situation where the health of everybody is pretty much equalized and it's poor, then I don't know how the healthcare system can cope. I mean, on the flip side, on the positive side, this may actually spur a great movement for taking health back. I mean, taking back health and making sure it's in your own hands. Because if people realize that not everybody can get access to a doctor, and by the way, the doctor doesn't really seem to help much. There's only one recourse. Well, actually, two. You either get hooked up on opioids, which a lot of people seem to be doing and giving up on life, or you take health back into your own hands and decide to trust yourself and your judgment and your experiment more than a person out there who has no interest in your to improve your life.
Yeah, no, I know we've talked about this topic a lot, but it seems like almost the entire culture is designed to make a person pretty depressed. And so on my Twitter, given this kind of racial tension of everything, it made me think of this, not specifically related to that, but this quote is from a book called The True Believer by Eric Hoffer in 1951. He says, passionate hatred can give meaning and purpose to an empty life. Most people haunted by purposelessness find new content by dedicating themselves to a holy cause, but also by nursing a fanatical grievance. A mass movement offers them unlimited opportunities for both. And so I resonate with that quote in like different areas of my life of being like obsessed with one topic or whatever in like an unhealthy way, not like a fascination way. And so I think that describes a lot of people, especially in the political realm. You get sucked into one side and think the other side is like pure evil or whatever. And I think that kind of characterizes that passionate hatred that Eric Hoffer is talking about.
Yeah, I mean, if life becomes meaningless, then you have to vent somewhere, right? And usually you don't vent by, some people will channel it in a positive way, but most will simply find somebody or something to hate. It's I think it's due to a feeling of powerlessness. Basically, it's a feeling that life is meaningless, but also because most normal people want to change things when things are not going well, right? And if the system doesn't provide you with the tools or makes you or consistently imposes learned helplessness in you by saying, oh, I'm going to vote for this person to change things, slap on the wrist, he'll change nothing.
Yeah.
Or you start a petition or, it gets killed in court. or you basically try to support this local community activist. He or she gets killed, or whatnot. It's just the system is designed in a way so no matter what you do, it makes your choices seem meaningless, and I think or at least powerless, right? And at some point, I think people either give up, and I mentioned the opioid epidemic, and many people, the experts, so quote unquote, are scratching their heads like, why is there such an epidemic of opioid addiction? Well, usually happens when people give up on life, right? So that's actually the other one extreme. The opposite extreme is when people become enraged. And I think that's what we're seeing, because it tends to be more visible. You don't see a crowd of opioid addicts massively overdosing, together in front of the White House. They may start to do that. I don't know. They may, but it's much more visible when you see a bunch of people, a large crowd forming and starting to become violent, or at least threaten to become violent. But they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, I don't have any statistics or anything, but it seems like there's been like a religious resurgence, and I can only guess that is because people are identifying the hopelessness, and that is an appealing thing to fill that in, obviously, because that gives a big worldview. Johnny Mojo says the system is designed to be dehumanizing, and so I think that's a good word to describe it.
Something interesting happened last week. I was walking back from the office. Again, it was late one night, and then there was this when things were really getting heated up here. So there was this group of protesters going towards the White House, and basically they were talking about MLK. And I, for whatever reason, I was dumb enough to interject, and I said, like, because they were saying, "Oh yeah, it's black against white," and I said, "Don't make that mistake. Remember do you know what MLK was killed for?" Like, yeah, because he was trying to free the black people from the oppression of the white. I said, nope, no, don't make that mistake. He basically, like, at that point, the rich whites, yes, they were whites mostly. They had already realized that you have to give the blacks, social, civil rights. But you know why? Because they spent the first half of the century preparing for that moment. They saw it coming, and they changed the laws in a way. They already had an infrastructure to ensure that civil rights don't mean anything. And actually, if you go to the Wikipedia page, even right now, it says MLK noticed that the fight for civil rights did not improve the lot of the black man. So he said something else is the real reason, and that real reason is poverty. That real reason is the system that is designed in a way to keep you down. So he changed the message, and I think Ray said in one of his interviews, as soon as MLK made the issue class and not race, he was immediately killed. And actually, he and Wikipedia talks about that, and talks about the poor man's campaign, where he basically said, race is no longer the core issue. The core issue is that we have people, and our brothers and sisters across all races, that are basically poor and don't stand a chance in this environment. We want all of these people to unite and demand change, right? And by change, he meant universal basic income, or whatever the equivalent was at the time, access to healthcare, access to education, etc., etc. I don't think he lived a month after he actually put this into practice. He was shot very, very soon after that. And what was striking to me is that most of these black young people on the street, they just looked at me as if I was crazy. They had never considered that. There was even one guy who I actually suspected was a saboteur. He was like, "Oh, don't listen to him, like the crackhead." No, he's a cracker. He doesn't understand our problems. And they just walked away, right? But it was. I mean, this part of the crowd is already being manipulated to start thinking of this as a racial issue, when in reality, of course, there's racism there. But it wasn't Rockefeller who said that racism is the greatest tool we've had to keep people divided. It's basically you turn them against each other, and that, because it plays on a very basic, primitive instinct of fear from people who are different from you, right? But it's really the only difference that needs to be fought in this world, or at least in the empire, is the haves versus the have-nots. And again, as soon as MLK made that the core issue, he was done.
I've never heard that quote before, but I would be interested in finding
which one?
The Rockefeller. That was John or David Rockefeller said that, the racism one.
One of the Rockefellers, he basically they asked him about racism, and then he said they're saying he was joking. He said it's one of the greatest tools the rich people ever got, because basically, and then I think Ray discussed it in one of it. He said the reason is because everybody has an inborn fear of people that are significantly different from you, right? and they stoke that fear. And racism is one of the most obvious, manifestations of that fear. But the only differences that actually matter on a daily basis is the haves versus the have-nots. So if all the people that are have-nots, they need to kind of like tolerate each other's differences, as he said about the various political movements, right? They need to tolerate these differences a little bit and focus on the bigger difference, which is them versus a very small group of people that control pretty much everything.
Yeah, and this is my opinion, but I feel like that word, like racist or racism, is starting to lose meaning, because I think when we were talking with Ray, like giving those vaccinations that contain HCG to like the Philippines, Mexico, what was it, Nicaragua, or the other places, anyways, like that is like
Kenya.
Yeah, Kenya. Like those are like these kind of true, really horrific racist acts, But I think in the media in the West, like racism is this like I don't know how to articulate it, but it's just like these slight variations in speaking incorrectly, dictated by whatever the person thinks is wrong, But I guess there are, I don't know what degrees of kind of racism, and I don't know. What do you think about it?
The media only cares about racism when it leads to the white people and the people of color in this country fighting. So anything that leads to that, media will pick it up and run with it. But if it's about systemic extermination of people somewhere else, like in another country, another part of the world, then it's not racism. It's either politics or I don't know, strategic planning.
Yeah.
If you're particularly cynical about it. I mean, but so only racism when it counts, and basically by counting, I mean if it serves the purpose of the ruling class, which is we fight over crumbs all the time, and basically like we demand change about in terms of racism, and they may even give you those changes, but it will not change the basic reality, which is you'll go right back to working a job that's meaningless by design, and you'll go right back to like going to a school that's dehumanizing you and making you dumb by design, and you go right back to eating the food that's making you sick and going to the doctor who is prolonging and enhancing that sickness. So these things will not change by demanding racial rights.
Yeah, the one other thing I want to add is sometimes the people I know that talk about race the most, I don't think they realize how bad, I've said this before, I don't think they realize how bad their quality of life is. Like they think they're looking at a specific race or something and think of how bad they have it, but they don't understand how bad their life is, specifically of what you just said. They're drinking their toxic water, their toxic food, breathing their toxic air. But they think they're like superior in some way, but they don't understand how shitty their quality of life is.
Just because police is not busting your door in the middle of the night and shooting you. Yeah, of course, that's probably it's less worse than having that happen. But guess what? You're getting killed slowly and by design.
Yeah.
By design.
Yeah.
If anything, it's actually I suspect it's the black people who may have on some level a healthier lifestyle because they have a stronger sense of community, because they feel like they're always under attack. And they have a strong sense of community. They go to church, and I'm not talking about the religious part of church, but like they cling together and they care about each other. And there's a bigger sense of community. If you go to you want to see soulless people, go to the suburbs and look at like the middle and upper middle class, predominantly white neighborhoods, and you'll see it's these people who just mechanically say hi to each other twice a day, and they mow their lawn and they go about their lives that are completely scheduled, to the point of I was reading because Twitter recommends you these feeds, right, based on what you post, and I was posting something on sexual health, I guess, like it was a few weeks ago, and then a recommended tweet popped up, and it was from this big time sexologist in New York City, and she was talking about how to improve the sex life between married couples, because apparently it's an epidemic of sexlessness or sexual dissatisfaction, which leads to cheating and whatnot. Anyways, her recommendation was you have to treat sex like a project, and basically it needs to be managed. So this means very rigid scheduling. And I'm like, you know what? It just doesn't put me in the mood when I hear sex being talked about that. But she was very serious. You need to have a project plan about your sex life, and you need to schedule your sex with your significant other, And then basically at, I don't know, 5 p.m. every Thursday, that's it. Lights go out, and then you guys go about and do your thing. And somehow miraculously by doing it on a scheduled basis and managing it and managing risks and costs versus, I'm like, who talks like that? Like, what's exciting about this way of living? But I know many people, predominantly white, who actually approach intimacy that way. Not just intimacy, human relationships. Some people even have, there's software out there that actually allows you to manage your friendships. And then you have to input, after each time you've met a person, you have to input like your interaction, and then it's stratified based on different metrics. And then the software recommends who you should be meeting with most, and then who you should be ignoring, and then who you should be cutting out completely out of your life. And I thought to myself, wow, that's truly technocracy. I mean, what was that quote you said? Like, the true enemy of the people is not fascism or communism, it's technocracy.
Yeah, Patrick Woods said
it's
that.
very firmly entrenched into the lives of some people living in modern societies.
You know, Georgie, I don't want you to not speak your mind at any time, but when you're walking down the street, I don't want you to be the Bulgarian Reginald Denny. And so please just keep your thoughts and opinions to yourself, because I don't want anything to happen to you. And so just going to throw that out there. Yeah, man, it's I appreciate that. This is such a sticky topic, and I do want to talk more. I know we talked about it last time with Ray, but I do want to kind of bring it up more because I don't know, I'm curious of what the specific cause and what is going to result of this. You know, we were speculating so much of what coronavirus means, and like what is the specific what's the specific result for this obviously inflated racial tension stuff that's happening.
Well, I mean, it's if anything else, I'm sure there's stuff going on behind the scenes right now. I just got a very interesting. My father is subscribed to Foreign Policy magazine. I subscribe him because he wants to, but because it's under my email, and I keep getting like a weekly digest of things. And they're saying that right now, because the real big project behind the scenes is China has almost fully digitized its currency. And in order for the U.S. and other superpowers to compete, like Russia and India and whatnot, they have to do the same thing. I didn't quite get why exactly does this make China more competitive. I guess because if all the money is electronic and basically the state controls it all, they can devalue it or overvalue it any way they want that suits like the central planning, right? So, but they're saying like other countries like Russia, United States, India and Brazil and you know, basically they're not there yet because too many people use cash. And they're saying now the big project behind the scenes is that to potentially digitize the dollar to the point where they will say no more than 10% of money will be actually in cash. If you get caught carrying more cash than that, then there's a serious. They're not going to throw you in jail, but they'll devalue the currency like India did that with the large bills. So they'll say like tomorrow, all bills with serial number, beyond certain and $100 denominations, you have 24 hours to turn them in, or they'll be useless, right? So something is going on behind the scenes, something big and probably financial that we're being led astray instead of keeping an eye on it.
Yeah. Well, that's been, people have been saying that for a long time, that was one of the goals of the New World Order type situation, was to make all the cash digital. Next article.
Magnesium, vitamin D, and B12 combo. Is that the one you thought I'm going to pick?
No, I wasn't sure. I have the statins one, the cardiolipin. I did want to talk about, probably talk about the serotonin, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but magnesium.
Yeah, they're all cool, but I mean, I picked that one because it's still, I guess, it's still relevant, right? We're all living in a pandemic. So guess what? Now even official studies are saying you can take a magnesium. I mean, if you look my post, I don't even know why they threw in the B12 in there, because they give a very weak rationale. They say, oh, B12 is important for the gut bacteria, which actually rang a bell, because if you remember, you actually had an interview with Pete one time and asked him about supplementing with B12. He said, I don't think it's a good idea because it's actually it may stimulate bacterial overgrowth. And several people have emailed me and their blood tests show very high B12 levels. And basically, like, subsequently, they found out they have like a Clostridia difficile infection or something else. So it seems to correlate.
Can I just clarify? What you said might be right, but the one thing I do have from him is that he said when a person's B12 level is high on a blood test, that might mean they have a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth because the type of bacteria produce B12. And I think I've identified that in a handful of people. Like they did have very high B12. I asked them if they were supplementing, they didn't, and their digestion would just be obviously like a wreck. And so I think that was part of it. But sorry, go ahead.
But I'm sure, I remember him saying several times that maybe in other interviews, maybe the KMUD ones, somebody asked about B12 as well. He said something along the same lines, but he also said that taking one supplementally is not a good idea because it actually stimulates even more the bacterial overgrowth. So anyways, long story short, that's the rationale actually they give. They say, you do need your microbiome for a proper immune response. So that's how we're throwing the B12 in there. No other rationale. But the good news, magnesium and vitamin D in combination were strikingly effective. And first of all, if you already have COVID-19, they were really effective, especially in the elderly, in reducing the progression of COVID-19 to the point where you require hospitalization. And if you're already in hospital and they gave you this combo, it decreased the chance by about 50% that you actually become critical or die. And I thought that's a great finding. Why are we not hearing about this? And we're talking about remdesivir or like the latest and greatest, I don't know what kind of toxic incarnation the pharma companies are working on. Even chloroquine would be less dangerous than these antivirals. But you don't have to do that. Now you can do the magnesium, vitamin D. Magnesium has been known actually for a while to be helpful for antiviral disease. I think even Pete recommended it a couple of times, saying that it's a great immunostimulant. And that if you can ensure that the magnesium is actually absorbed and retained, he thought it was a great antiviral remedy during flu season.
Good stuff. So if you do get a fake COVID-19 test, you could treat it with magnesium, vitamin D, and B12. Do you want to do the cardiolipin one? I feel like that's important to go over because I think this grounds a lot of the anti-PUFA sentiment that we have on this show. So I think that's important for understanding.
Yeah, I mean, basically the study found that that with advancing age, the mitochondria functionality declines, right? And they said it's tied to a dysfunction in the lysosome, which is a portion of the cell that recycles cellular debris inside of the cell. I don't know why they decided to supplement with cardiolipin, but I bet the rationale is because it's so important for the functionality of cytochrome C oxidase. Actually, they say that it's very important for the. If you look at the actual, I remember reading it. If you look at the actual study, they actually say that cardiolipin is crucial for the functioning of complex 3 and complex 4, especially complex 4. So they basically said that, okay, so whatever the reason is, the dysfunction in the lysosomes, by supplementing cardiolipin, we expect to see an increase in mitochondrial activity. So that's why they gave it, sort of like to balance the decline, not by addressing the direct cause, which is the lysosome, but they fed. There we go. It says the lysosome talks with the mitochondria through special fats called cardiolipins. So they restore this communication by basically feeding cardiolipin because they noticed that the cardiolipin levels decline with aging as well. So they thought, okay, maybe that's the reason for the miscommunication between the lysosomes and the mitochondria is the lack of cardiolipin. So they fed cardiolipin, and basically the function of the mitochondria was restored back to youthful levels. I did not see. They did not specify what was the composition of the cardiolipin, but it was extracted from bovine hearts, which means it was mostly saturated. And I think that makes a crucial difference because I've seen studies with porcine cardiolipin being supplemented, and the studies were not good. I mean, they were either null or they actually found reverse effects. It wasn't for that specific issue, but experiments with feeding cardiolipin are not new. They've been around for at least, I would say, 30 years. And this specific one was with bovine cardiolipin, which means its composition is probably about 90% or more saturated fat, mostly stearic acid.
Yeah, this is a paper that Ray quoted, and just the quote on my Twitter, it says, our findings that arachidonic acid and DHA, I forgot how to pronounce that, concentrations increase supports the hypothesis that cardiolipin remodeling occurs with aging. Increased lipid peroxidation is a plausible mechanism by which cardiolipin decreases with age. And then I have a few more here. So as to what cardiolipin is, as you already mentioned, cardiolipin is a phospholipid found almost exclusively at the level of the inner mitochondrial membrane, where it is biosynthesized under a thyroid hormone regulation. A specific and tight association between cytochrome C oxidase and cardiolipin. And then lastly, PUFA and mitochondrial cardiolipin are attacked by mitochondria-produced reactive oxygen species. Cardiolipin is the most sensitive to the ROS-induced peroxidation. This means that its peroxidation initiates a chain reaction, setting on fire other membrane constituents.
Constituents, yeah.
So yeah, I just feel like this is central because the accumulation of unsaturated fats over a lifetime replaces the cardiolipin with unsaturated fats, and then that slows down the activity of cytochrome C oxidase, which is allowing you to do this electron transfer to oxygen. And Ray and I think other people too think this cytochrome C oxidase is like very critical for mitochondrial respiration to happen, and that's why what elucidates the negative effects of nitric oxide as well.
Yeah, I mean, and then that's what creates the reactive oxygen species. People think the result of proper mitochondrial function. They're not. Yeah. It's precisely when cytochrome C oxidase is not working, these electrons have to go somewhere, right? And in earlier stages of the metabolism in the Krebs cycle, you can do the fatty acid synthase and you can turn these extra electrons into fat. Once you get to the electron transport chain complex, there isn't much that can be done. So the only thing that can be done is they can interact with the molecular oxygen and create the superoxide, and then that thing starts to wreak havoc on anything with an unstable lipid attached to it. And since we're already into the inner mitochondrial membrane, then basically your prime target over there is going to be the membrane itself and constituents such as cardiolipin. So yeah, and that's why certain nutrients like vitamin E or methylene blue, they're structural antioxidants. They actually prevent these excessive electrons from actually creating the superoxide ions by accepting them. And then in the case of vitamin E, so methylene blue will accept those extra electrons, right? So prevent them, creating the superoxide anion and other reactive oxygen species. And then vitamin E will actually protect those unstable lipids. So even though if you have a buildup of these electrons, they will be less likely to cause damage. So I would actually probably say that methylene blue may be a more important antioxidant because it will take care of those extra electrons. Because even if you're loaded up on vitamin E, those extra free electrons are not a good sign. They will do some damage, even if it's not attacking the unstable lipids.
So like one way to think about antioxidants is that they withdraw electrons from the system. And one of the major problems in stress and aging is this like jam in the electron transport chain, and that creates the free radicals, and then they steal electrons from unsaturated fats, and that creates a negative chain reaction, basically. Like
actually methylene blue's antioxidant effect is by it being an oxidant. So oxidizing agents withdraw electrons, right? But by withdrawing them, it's preventing the creation of reacting oxygen species which damage the lipids. So it's by restoring bottom line is by restoring metabolism back to normal, you're creating an antioxidant effect. By antioxidant meaning preventing these damaging superoxide species and hydroxyl groups and whatnot from damaging the structure of the cell, right? Because when people think of antioxidants, estrogen is an antioxidant, but in a bad way. It creates a reductive state. So there are two ways of thinking of antioxidants. One, by shifting the balance from oxidation to reduction. That is an antioxidant by definition, right? But I would like to think of it more as a hypoxant. So in other words, it prevents the oxygen from doing its job, and that's what results in the accumulation of free electrons. Proper antioxidants like vitamin E or methylene blue, they don't act that way. They protect the targets. In the case of vitamin E, they protect the unstable lipids, but don't mess up with the ability to use oxygen. In fact, vitamin E is known to improve the utilization of oxygen because it opposes estrogen, precisely because it opposes estrogen. And then electron acceptors, by accepting these extra electrons, they prevent the situation where reactive oxygen species will be created, right? So it's like indirect antioxidant effect. And I think it's the latter one that's more important. The first one that the estrogen does is actually bad. It's a form of hypoxia.
So this is like, correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but the antioxidant is like just a bad name because that's anti-loss of electrons. But the whole thing we're talking about is we want to lose our electrons to oxygen. But but it's
or to a safe acceptor like a quinone or something like that.
Okay.
Like as long as they're not sticking around and to wreak havoc, then it's okay.
And then in the superoxide and the hydroxyl group, where are those produced in specific places in the electron transport chain from like the complexes?
Yeah, I mean, actually, all four can produce them, but basically, any place where you have 3 and 4 tend to produce them the most because that's where molecular oxygen is involved the most. But because it's already into the mitochondria, it's not limited to those specific locations. So, in other words, once you start getting unused oxygen floating around because the electrons are not making it to the oxygen to be accepted by it properly, which happens through the final step of step 4. Then you're asking for trouble. That oxygen actually starts becoming problematic. It results in the creation of the superoxide anion, and that is very reactive. And it's like you're having it's known to actually even damage DNA. So it can be mutagenic if this continues for too long.
And we can, if you don't have any specific thoughts on this, we can move on. But I was reading another Repeat person named Jay. He wrote an article about what was it, like FAD2 increasing in fatty acid oxidation and that blocking maybe complex 1. I'm totally forgetting all the details, but I thought that was really interesting because it either somebody has said it and it never stuck, or this was the first time it actually stuck. But that's part of the
complex 2 is FAD dependent.
Okay.
Flavonine dinucleotide. So it's similar to NAD, but it's based on riboflavin. And basically, if you don't have enough riboflavin, complex 2 will not work. So you can get there was a chart floating around. I have to send it to you. They basically say that 80% of the energy you produce, 80% of the ATP you synthesize depends on NAD, and the other 20% depend on FAD. So you'll still be, so the NAD is much more important, right? But if you have a riboflavin deficiency, or it's the synthesis of FAD from riboflavin is not working properly for some reason, you're going to have a metabolic problem, and actually leads to the MELAS syndrome, mitochondrial encephalopathy and stroke, and I'm forgetting exactly but basically you're getting these stroke-like episodes, muscle weakness, you slurring your speech and similar symptoms, and actually they're easily correctable by riboflavin, and that's I think it's a pretty good indication how important is FAD for the mitochondria.
Sweet. I wish I could. I should have written what he said down. Okay. So how long have we been streaming here? Let me check. So we're about an hour in. We should spend a few more, maybe 1 or 2 more articles, then get to super chats, and then call it a day, because I'm sure that will take a little while. Was there any other article that you?
I thought the food emulsifiers and endotoxin cause brain bleeding. I think this is like a really important study, because even though it was on a very specific type of brain bleeding called cavernous angioma or angioma, I don't know how exactly they pronounce it. Actually, the rates of hemorrhaging stroke have been increasing over the last 20 to 30 years, and I think at this point they're on par with ischemic stroke, which was what the typical view of cardiovascular disease that everybody has in their mind is bad cholesterol blocking your arteries, and basically at some point a little piece gets chipped off of the wall and starts circulating around, and then it blocks an artery, and that's it. You get the ischemic stroke or the heart attack. That is, I guess a decent description of the ischemic stroke, but rates of the hemorrhaging stroke, which is much more dangerous and difficult to treat, and often requires surgery. Because if you get a severe brain bleeding, they have to get that blood out of the subarachnoid space, or it can actually put pressure in your brain and cause the brain to herniate, and that's almost universally lethal. So the rates of hemorrhaging strokes have been increasing, and it's been a mystery. What could possibly be causing it? Yet at the same time, the people who actually get into end up in the hospital with one of these things, they've done blood tests, and in almost always they have elevated HDL. So HDL is one of the most reliable biomarkers of elevated endotoxin. There's a specific test for endotoxin. I think it's called endotoxin carrying protein. There's also soluble CD14. These are also, but they're very rarely done as tests. I mean, a hematologist has to be looking for something specific to be doing these tests. The more common one, and the one that almost every doctor tests, is HDL. And subsequent, numerous studies have already established that having a high HDL is not a good sign. Actually, if your HDL is high, but your LDL is low, that's a very, very bad sign. And at this point, even mainstream medicine is recognizing that. Anyways, long story short, most of the people who ended up in a hospital and died from a hemorrhaging stroke have been found to have elevated HDL, which to me was a connection to elevated endotoxin. And this study, even though it's not on hemorrhaging stroke, but a different type of bleeding in the brain, which is actually even more serious, with higher mortality rate, it found that in a mouse model that endotoxin and a number of different food emulsifiers that are thought to be safe. At this point, we all know that carrageenan is a pretty nasty stuff. That, despite the fact that it's extracted from algae, it's actually banned in several countries because it's a known colon carcinogen. But carrageenan aside, people tend to think that the various gums are perfectly fine, right? Acacia gum, locust bean gum, gum arabica, whatever it's called. They're all just emulsifiers extracted from plants. Well, every single one of these that they tried caused the exact same bleeding problems that elevated endotoxin caused, and that was this lethal disease called cavernous angioma. So, and actually, they tested the emulsifiers in pretty low levels. So that's what we're eating. I mean, these emulsifiers are everywhere, even in organic foods. In fact, I've looked at the labels of compared organic to non-organic yogurts in my local Whole Foods. The non-organic ones typically use pectin or modified cornstarch. Now, I'm not sure at this point which one is worse, because as bad as the genetically modified cornstarch is, I don't know of any studies that show that it can lead to such severe bleeding problems in the brain. However, all of the organic brands had not just one, but at the very least two and often three of these emulsifiers. So there was a guy who used to send me emails just when I was starting into the whole peat community. He kept saying, "Hey man, mark my word, one day you'll find out this whole organic thing is a scam." and I kept saying, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Look, whenever there's money into something, basically there are forces already in there trying to corrupt it and kind of keep it looking nice on paper, but at the same time lower as much as possible the cost of production by compromising the standard." And he didn't talk about the gums, but he kept saying that organic stuff is bullshit. He has been bullshit for a long time. He claimed that the standard was created. Didn't claim, but the standard was created by USDA, I think in the 70s. And he said that by the middle of the 80s, there was already that it was so heavily compromised that when they did tests on lab animals, it showed that the non-organic food was causing classical problems that they didn't think was serious, like cardiovascular disease, arthritis, and whatnot. And organic foods were causing cancer. So I have to dig out those studies. That'll be very interesting to talk about, because this means there was the new stuff, the experimental stuff, was being thrown into the organic standard because it was still new and being developed, and they could get away with it. While the older stuff that's been around for decades, if not centuries, that's based on pretty established laws, there isn't that much wiggle room to compromise.
Yeah, I suspect this is why some people feel better on like carnivore diets. Like if you only eat meat, you're avoiding citric acid, carrageenan, gums, and so many different additives, And so I know for myself, like You know how some people will say like, oh, don't fast. You should eat to avoid the stress. Well, I'd rather fast for multiple days than like eat something with carrageenan in it, because that would upset my stomach so badly that I'd rather literally go without food for a long time. And so it's definitely,
you can actually survive pretty well on orange juice because it's got decent amount of, actually it's pretty good amount of the electrolytes, of the alkaline minerals. And they keep, together with the sugar and some of the phytonutrients in there, like the flavonoids, they keep cortisol from doing a lot of its damage on the muscle. So you're not going to lose a lot of muscle mass if you fast, but you drink orange juice throughout the day. That's probably the only fast that I support. I mean, yes, if you're forced, if you know that for the next 2 days you'll have the choice of really crappy food, or maybe like some, you have access to orange juice and a little bit of cheese, I would go with that, even if it's if you're not meeting your caloric demands. Yeah. But you can fast on orange juice and still be okay. You will not look gaunt.
Yeah. Let me clarify a little bit. So I think the only times where I've been like forced to fast for a long time is when traveling. And so when I'm in the airport or whatever, I would rather fast than eat some super shitty food that I knew was going to upset my stomach. But I'm just throwing that out there because I know a lot of people make that kind of wager. They'll say like tell somebody not to fast because they should eat. But I'm just saying it's slightly more complicated, I think. Okay.
Yeah, it's better not to eat if you have to eat toxins instead, right?
Yeah. Okay, I found the thing. Let me just say this just because it was on my mind. So this is Jay Feldman, and it's NADH versus FADH2, and this is in relation to using glucose or fat as a main source of fuel. And he says NADH and FADH2 are both electron carriers that donate electrons in an electron transport chain, allowing the production of ATP, blah, blah, blah. Glucose oxidation produces 25% more NADH and half as much FADH2 as fat oxidation. Together, this leads to a ratio of FADH2 to NADH that is around 2.5 times lower than that of fat oxidation. And then he says, because FADH2 donates electrons at complex 2 downstream of complex 1, it reduces the amount of ubiquinone available to accept electrons at complex 1, leading to a buildup of electrons at complex 1. And then he goes on to say all the problems. For one, this increases the electron leakage at complex 1, which increases the production of ROS, specifically superoxide. And so this is kind of interesting because sometimes people will say like keto diets emulate cancer therapy, and they're really talking about it increasing like the reactive oxygen species and kind of cellular harm, right? Is that off base, or is that right?
No, it's actually true. But basically, the reason the reactive oxygen things work are that they're both helpful and harmful. The helpful part is that the reactive oxygen species can actually oxidize the reduced glutathione, and that by itself can cause the cancer cell to undergo apoptosis. So anytime you shift the cell more towards oxidation, and if you shift the balance beyond a certain like a critical point, any sick cell will actually immediately commit apoptosis. And one way to do is by raising carbon dioxide. Another way is by basically bombarding that cell with reactive oxygen species. They can oxidize the glutathione, the reduced one back into the oxidized one. The bad part of the reactive oxygen species is that by attacking the cell, basically the cell this accelerates the process of division. So, and this is why usually when you go on chemotherapy and they kill the original cancer, usually, yes, they kill the large primary tumor, but within a month, or actually even while you're getting the chemotherapy, you get metastases everywhere, small ones, precisely because it triggers both the division and awakens the cancer stem cells. So you just turn the cancer in. It's still a systemic issue, but from a relatively localized problem for a specific organ into essentially multiple thousands, if not millions, smaller versions of it everywhere. And those are much harder to treat. Any oncologist will tell you that they would rather deal with a very large and well-established primary tumor that's localized than a million smaller metastases, because once that happens, actually, even the classification of cancer, if you have metastasis, I think you're already at the very least stage 2, and often you're stage 3, right? But if you have no matter how large your primary tumor is, if it's relatively local, if it's localized and has not yet involved the lymphatic tissue around it, you are at stage 1, no matter how big that tumor is. So that's what the reactive oxygen species do. The doctors are hoping that they will kill the primary tumor, right? But they will not trigger the reactivation of the stem cells, and basically the division of the tumor will be overwhelmed. So while the tumor is quickly, as soon as you hit it with reactive oxygen species, the division speeds up by several thousand-fold, and they're hoping that you will kill it quicker than it will be able to reproduce itself and send those seeds, around the body. More often than not, it does not work.
And then this electron leak, the synthesis of ketones is kind of an antidote to this in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yeah. Okay. Basically, if you have extra electrons, you can create ketones by accepting those extra electrons.
Mm-hmm. And so that might mitigate this, contributing to the whole slowdown process. Because if the ketones weren't around, this would probably burn up a person pretty quickly, right? And so that's kind of mitigating some of the harm. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Just satisfying my own understanding. I appreciate it.
Yeah, but basically it shows you that you don't want to be using up. This also suggests that CoQ10 could be a viable therapy for cancer. Mm-hmm. There have been several trials for Parkinson with very high dosages, between 2 and 3 grams daily, and they were really, really promising. But I have not seen any follow-up because there were human trials, but they were small scale, maybe like 30 to 50 people. They weren't full-blown. Well, then first of all, you're never going to get a company to sponsor a clinical trial that leads to CoQ10 being approved for cancer. But interestingly, all of the ones that I've seen for Parkinson with smaller, not cancer, but any disease, I've seen these trials with CoQ10 for Parkinson, and they all claim remarkable success. Yet there was no follow-up for any of them. But if it works so well for Parkinson's disease, I think those same dosages could be tried for cancer as well. I asked Ray a long time ago about this, and he said, yes, but I think vitamin K can actually do everything CoQ10 does at lower dosages and then some.
I'm the only one that can do a Ray impression here, George. I'm just joking.
Sorry.
I like
you are much better.
I like you.
I have a bad accent, and it just butchers it.
You have a Bulgarian repeat accent. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, good stuff. Thank you for clarifying that. So I have the blocking serotonin and then the SSRI one, and then we can move on to super chats unless there's any other article you wanted to chat about.
Yeah, so I think the blocking serotonin is that's pretty important, because if you go to any doctor and ask them what's causing NAFLD, they'll say too much sugar, mm-hmm. right? And then a lot of people say, well, you're eating too much. I mean, maybe too many calories. Whatever the reason is, you will never hear from anybody that the cause may be hormonal, or God forbid serotonin is involved, the happy hormone. You really hacking at the foundation of medicine there, because if that pillar falls, then I think if we manage to gut serotonin, I don't think much of medicine will survive. Mm-hmm. So many different things depend on that mantra, and so many different things will fall simply because they're so interconnected. Anyways, long story short, about 3 months ago, I posted another study which showed that elevated cortisol is a direct cause of NAFLD, and cortisol and serotonin are very tightly correlated. Serotonin is, unlike what your doctor will tell you, serotonin levels are actually elevated in depression, and there's very serious evidence that this elevation is causal. More importantly, serotonin is the most potent endogenous stimulator of the HPA axis. So you cannot have high serotonin and not have high cortisol, or one aspect of the HPA axis. Maybe your CRH will be elevated, maybe your ACTH will be elevated, right? Because it stimulates the entire cascade. Whether you have high cortisol or not will probably depend largely on how functional your adrenal glands are. In some people, like with advancing age, they start to atrophy, so you may not always get the Cushing syndrome level hypercortisolemia, but still, that study from a few months ago showed that even mild elevations in cortisol over time reliably caused non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And given that serotonin, now this study is saying serotonin can cause it. They didn't say serotonin caused it. They said that an anti-serotonin agent can cure it, and by extension, they said this means that peripheral serotonin has very different effects from central serotonin, which is known as the happy hormone. But in your gut or in your peripheral tissues, serotonin can be what do they call it, like an evil entity or something like that. So they're still clinging on to that thing that somehow there are two types of serotonin. There's one in your brain that magically cures every problem you have, and the exact same molecule that's circulating around in your body elsewhere is bad, right? Mm-hmm. And long story short, they used the serotonin antagonist, and it cured the mice of fatty liver. So I think that's pretty. And then now they're wondering, given that I don't know, like a quarter to a third of all women are on antidepressants, on a serotonergic antidepressants. What do you expect? Then of course, there's now an epidemic of fatty liver disease and even cirrhosis and liver cancer. Mm-hmm. And the cause is mysterious. We just don't know. It's some evil force that's materializing out of nowhere and causing these mysterious diseases when the evidence is staring us in the face.
Yeah, and apparently physicians think that it's not safe it's safe for the baby when a woman is pregnant to take SSRIs. So that's just let that sink in for a little. Okay, so
and it's actually, if you want me to scare and depress you even more, SSRIs are now approved for toddlers. So that's some pretty nasty stuff. I mean, even if the baby was not born with autism, you can bet that child will have autism by the age of 5. If at the age of 2, you started giving it antidepressants, how on earth would you recognize depression in a child that's 2 years old? Like, this is really beyond me. I know a psychiatrist who is the father of a girl. The girl is very good friend with my younger daughter. And basically, like, he's a psychiatrist. He treats children as well. So I asked him, like, how do you treat children? He's like, oh, they're very specific checklists. I just follow the checklist. I'm like, you just follow the checklist? So how do you communicate with a 2-year-old? Oh, you don't have to communicate. So what do you do? Oh, we just observe, and basically, like, we give the child some toys, and if the child refuses to play, basically that's, strike one. And then basically, we give the child some sweet food, and the child refuses to eat sweet food, which actually the second part has some reasoning behind it. Because in animal models, a sign of anhedonia, right? So they're saying children always like sweets, so if they refuse to eat sweets, something's wrong, right? Mm-hmm. So he enumerated a number of different things that only the sugar avoidance thing is kind of that struck me as like a somewhat reasonable thing. Everything else was so arbitrary, but once they basically collect points, as he said it, once they collect 6 out of 10, automatically depression, right? I'm like, it cannot be anything else. Oh, well, I mean, it's hard to say because they're 2 years old, So hold on a second. So that these drugs have serious side effects, right? They're psychotropic. They're changing the mind of that person. So why is it acceptable? Well, I mean, basically, we have to start as early as possible to limit future damage. Well, we don't even know if this person has depression. Well, I mean, he's like, look, I don't even have latitude in these things. You just don't understand. I follow a checklist. I'm like, wow, that's like, it's starting to sound more and more like the Nuremberg trials. I was just following orders, man. What do you want from me? It's not an orders, it's checklist, right? But no, he was pretty open. He said, I don't know if they have depression, but I do have a checklist, and we do these tests, and basically if they score 6 out of 10 or more, automatically we labeled. He's like, it's not even up to me. The insurance company will actually battle you if you diagnose them with something else, because they'll say, give me the results of the assessment. So he sends that assessment, and he's like, if I say something else, the insurance company will say, why did you stray from established diagnostic criteria? And he's like, there's nothing I can say in return. The patient will not pay. The insurance company will not pay. He's like, I'll go bankrupt. So he's like, that's it. I just follow the checklist.
Yep.
Anyways, but they are approved for children that are 2 or older. So you can get these drugs as well. I mean, for your child.
That's news to me. I didn't know that. Speaking of, so SSRI drugs increase violent behavior and promote recidivism. I don't even know what that means. What does it mean?
Repeating crime.
Okay.
Let's see.
And you call serotonin is the master switch of the danger signal. And so serotonin being right in the center of that complex biochemical web of stress. And Ray has a quote I posted on my Twitter a few times. It's like, you can't understand what he's working on unless you understand where serotonin fits in. He says something like, to understand estrogen, you have to understand serotonin, and to understand polyunsaturated fats, you have to understand estrogen and serotonin, and to understand thyroid, you have to understand all of those. And so I think that's a lot of the burden or the barrier to entry to all of this stuff is it's so many reversals of so many things that are commonly thought of in a specific way. And so I think that's probably why we do these, to get the message out. But yeah, serotonin.
But the good news is, because they're so interrelated, right? And if serotonin is at the core, you tackle serotonin, many other things may fall apart, simply because you will not be able to continue with these. Well, let's not challenge medicine. We know that they can hold paradoxical views and sell a lot of toxic drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's not tempt them, but I'm hoping that if serotonin is toppled, then many other things will fall apart. So basically, as I said in this post, not many people know, but when Prozac, which is the first, I think, SSRI that was officially approved, when Prozac was first approved in the United States, of course, I think it was Eli Lilly who produces it. They immediately wanted to expand their market, and they went to Europe, Western Europe at the time, because I think it was like the late 80s. So communism was still existing. So Western Europe was the free part of Europe, and they went there and they tried to push Germany to start prescribing it. Yet when the German BGA, the equivalent of the FGA, I think it stands for like Bundestag Gesundheit Agency or something like that. So anyways, basically means like the People's Health Agency. When they looked at the evidence, they said, you gotta be kidding me. You want us to approve this drug for depression, yet this drug reliably causes a significant percentage of people to commit suicide, and they weren't suicidal before? I mean, why would we do that? They said, if we let the depressed people untreated, smaller percentage will commit suicide than if we put them on the drug. And for a while, basically, Germany was able to resist that. In 1987, I think, was when this started. For a while, they were actually able to resist, but I think eventually the United States threatened to pull out the military base. There's a massive military base in Germany, and then withhold some other, basically threatened financial sanctions and toppling the economy. Unless Germany agrees to allow. This is just over one drug, so Germany succumbed. But I think to this day, what Germany did is that they said, okay, we have to agree to follow whatever the empire orders us to do. But here's what we're going to do. They created something called Commission E. Here's the letter E, and what Commission E did, went out there and took all of the folk remedies that were recorded in German folklore and tested them under controlled environment, and basically created this handbook of herbal medicines that are equivalent or better than existing drugs. So if you go to Germany to this day, you're actually allowed, and your doctor will probably talk to you about it. Well, I don't know, maybe the younger ones are more corrupt, but your doctor likely will at least mention herbal remedies such as St. John's wort, which contains basically like several alkaloids that are known to be potent antidepressants. And in Germany, you can actually get prescribed St. John's wort as a drug, and you can get it prescribed as a treatment for depression. And a recent study found that the Germans have the highest rate of non-pharmaceutical drug usage in the entire European Union. I don't think that's by coincidence. Basically, that the government said, okay, we're getting our arms twisted here. We can't do much against the invasion of these pharmaceutical drugs, but we can give you an alternative. And they spend money and about a decade collecting this. And I think this book is available in English. And I think somebody tried to digitize it. But anyways, I'll find it. I'll send you a link for whoever's interested. Long story short, Prozac was known from the very beginning to increase suicide and violent behavior. And basically, this newest study is coming out of Sweden and is showing that people given SSRIs develop a tendency to commit violent crimes that they didn't have this tendency before. And the violent effects can last for up to 12 weeks after halting SSRI treatment. Guess what? I looked at the study. It only followed them for up to 12 weeks later. We don't know if these effects actually ended the 12 weeks or not. All they're saying is that for the 12 weeks let me rephrase, for the 12 weeks of follow-up that we did, the effects continued to be there. More importantly, it increased basically risk of violent criminality in adults as well as adolescents. So both children and adults, right? And I guess the most important thing is basically it made past offenders more likely to recommit a violent crime during SSRI treatment. There's at least 3 or 4 posts on the forum, Repeat Forum, that I've made over the past, the several years in the past, that show that not only is this well known, but apparently governments around the world are well aware of the connection between SSRI usage and violent crime. There was even a study, was unofficial because it will never get published in a journal. It was a sort of like a self-study done by a statistician who said that every violent crime that you can think of in the United States that was done over the last 10 years, whether there was a mass shooting, right? Or it was like some kind of like, violent crime, like, breaking into people's homes, like robbing and raping and whatnot. Every single one of these people was on at least one psychotropic drug. And I think in more than 80% of the cases, they were taking an SSRI on top of other things. But the SSRI was present in 80% of the cases. And many times, these people were not violent, basically. That you can trace, as much as this person could, you can trace their violent behavior, to them starting to see a therapist and getting prescribed a drug. I'm just turning the lights because...
guys, thank you so much for joining us this Friday. Please like this episode, as I mentioned before. Like that really helps us. It's such a small thing you can do, but it supports these shows and I think gets the word out, or shows that people at least enjoy them to some degree. Can you continue your thought, and then I'll go through my diatribe.
I mean, yeah. Well, I was going to switch to ketamine because I think that's actually a pretty monumental study. Let's do it. It puts another nail in the coffin of serotonin. So almost everybody at this point knows that ketamine, also known as Special K in the club world. I have not used it. I swear to God, I have never used it. We do not use illicit drugs at ID Labs. After hours and under control. No, I'm just joking. So anyways, ketamine was recently approved by the FDA as a fast-acting antidepressant, working within minutes of administration. Now, here's what has, a little bit of digression here. LSD, ketamine, ecstasy, also known as MDMA officially, all of these drugs are classified as Schedule 1, the most severe, kind of like the most illegal drug you can possess in the United States and actually many other countries around the world. You get caught with one of these things, even in small amounts for personal usage, you're looking at jail time, even if a first-time offender. Yet what happened is that over the last, I would say 5 years, because I've been tracking the research, I noticed that more and more pharmaceutical companies are doing research with these drugs. So now all of these drugs are heavily illegal, yet little by little, they're making their way back into society, or at least the legally obedient part of society, in the form of extremely expensive formulations of the exact same drugs that you're being told that will drive you completely berserk and you will ruin society and civilization as we know it. I'm speaking of LSD. Or when you're on ecstasy, you're turning into a hypersexualized, mindless animal. This was, I think, quote from a Republican senator from South Carolina, or many others have said pretty much the same things. Or ketamine, you're basically it was a sedative for horses. It was not meant to be used for humans, and people who use ketamine are causing physical damage to their brain with every single usage. That's actually, I think, quote from the Surgeon General back in the 90s. Long story short, these drugs are slowly coming back in terms of, is now officially sanctioned drugs. Of the 3 that I mentioned, only LSD has not been approved yet. MDMA, I think, is either approved already or about to be approved as a very fast-acting and permanent treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. something that's really a huge problem, not only in the general population, but specifically in the military. The official stats say a third of the military suffers from PTSD. So what do we know now? That given how political these things are, you can double that number and you'll probably be closer to the truth. So ecstasy cures it. And even the studies say cures it. Now ketamine, it's known that ketamine has an antidepressant effect, but we've always been told that it acts through this obscure and unknown mechanism, possibly involving the NMDA receptor and acting there as an antagonist. Yet, when you bring up other NMDA antagonists, such as magnesium, you immediately get this violent response saying like, no, magnesium, like this is such a simple mechanism, it could never explain the antidepressant effects that ketamine has. Well, then why are you proposing it? And now I found out why. Because it turns out that ketamine cures depression by rapidly lowering serotonin and simultaneously increasing dopamine. Now, if that doesn't prove for you that serotonin is the cause of depression and doing anything to lower it or oppose it actually cures it and very rapidly, then I don't know what would. But now I understand why for decades there was such a reluctance, because I suspect that the government knew for a long time that ketamine has an anti-serotonin effect. But of course, you can never admit this publicly. And the official mechanism of action based on which the FDA approval was issued is still NDMA antagonism. So we'll see. But I thought it was a pretty seminal study because the first one that says lowering serotonin and or increasing dopamine not only cures depression, but it does so rapidly within several hours of administering whatever treatment has these results.
Awesome stuff. Thank you for that. Okay, so guys, like this episode, that really supports us. Appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. And also, you'll be entered into the Tocovit giveaway. And for anybody that wasn't with us at the beginning of the show, DBO514 has won a bottle of Tocovit. So please email me, Danny@DannyRoddy.com. I'll just give my little speech again. This is a user supported show, or like an audience supported show rather. And so again, because of the things we talk about, especially those Ray episodes, we don't show up in rankings. And so any little thing you guys can do that helps us and we appreciate it. Effort has been put into the audio quality. Hopefully this sounds better. I bet I will find out after the show is over. And working on getting all the episodes on a podcast aggregator, because that's been something that's been repeatedly requested, and I just didn't have the know-how to do it, but now I think I figured it out. And then again, not to go over.
Speaking of promotion,
let
me interject a little bit. I recently read an article, because I do come from an IT background, that Google has now changed their algorithm to more heavily take into account Twitter position. So any retweets of the episode will likely help Google change its mind. Well, I shouldn't say will, might. But if Google really does, now give preference to tweets and especially retweets, that will be a great way, because even if it's just retweeting it to your network, they don't necessarily have to like it. So it's not so much the likes as it is because Google suspects that some people are running bots and liking their own episodes, right? But retweets apparently are now factoring much more heavily into the Google algorithm.
Yeah, I see our future involving another service, I think. So DLive is another popular live streaming service, and I'm investigating how to dual stream over there so we could stream still on YouTube and then stream over there. I'm not like totally sold on DLive as a platform, but there's really no other streaming services like free big ones. Yeah. And so again, I think like I talked about in the beginning, like some of the things I think we talk about are taboo in some way, shape, or form. And so I think that's always going to put us behind in YouTube. And so, yeah. And again, we don't do the show for the numbers or anything, but it's sad to see like not a lot of growth over a long period of time. And so, yeah, but anyways, thank you guys.
I'm seeing a lot of comments on my Twitter feed about the episode. So, I mean, there's a lively discussion about that on Twitter. Maybe not on YouTube. Maybe Google is killing all of that. But other areas where this stream makes it to, I think they you can see that the community there interacts with it. They're engaged.
Yeah, again, extremely happy with the trajectory of the show. I think it would be a shame to not think that we weren't being slowed down a little bit by the things we talk about that are not favored by YouTube specifically. Okay, so follow Georgie on Twitter at Haydit. Idealabsdc.com, Georgie's supplement company. Are you working on anything new? Want to talk about anything specifically?
Let's see. There is an ongoing study with Pyrocet. And let's see. Should I jinx it? Okay, maybe I won't jinx it. So it is for the exact same murine leukemia that we used Cortinone Plus for, but this time the results are striking. We may actually have a cure. So let's see what happens. So it's been 25 days into the study. It usually goes on for 60. So on the 25th day, they actually kill a few animals from each group and dissect them to see the development of the tumor firsthand. First they do palpation, which is like touching the outside of the animal where they expect the tumors, where they normally develop, right? And basically, it's a study with Oxidal and Pyrocet. So the Pyrocet group, the Pyrocet and Oxidal combination, we haven't started yet. That's logistic nightmare that I learned the hard way, that it always happens no matter what you do. But anyways, the group receiving only Pyrocet, the two animals that were killed 3 days ago and were dissected, have 0 tumors. So this is unheard of. So we'll see what happens. But if that continues, if we get even one animal after, basically extending with no tumor, and I'm not talking about metastasis, no tumor formed, and this is a murine leukemia virus that is known as 100% transplantable, 100% lethal. So if we get even one animal to be cured or at least have no tumor beyond the 60 days, I think that's huge. They may finally shut me down if that actually happens. So we'll see if it's good news or bad news. But so far, it's going in a really positive direction. I did not expect such a great result from a humble Pyrocet, because these two ingredients you can get them pretty much, well, not from Amazon, but you can buy them from chemical companies around the world. And the proposed mechanism does seem to be inhibition of fatty acid oxidation, because they before killing the animals, they did some biomarker analysis, and as we expect, basically, like, the blood glucose is normal in the regular animals. It's really high in the cancer-stricken animals because their cortisol levels are very high. So in the ones that got the Pyrocet, basically the cortisol levels are normalized. The inflammatory biomarkers are normal. If you remember a very old interview from Ray, he said that all cancer patients have elevated erythrocyte sedimentation rate. It's like one of the systemic biomarkers of inflammation. We did confirm that it's very high in the cancer animals. The ones without the tumor, their levels are close to 0. So that seems to correlate with basic cancer being an inflammatory / metabolic disease. So, I don't know. I'm pretty hopeful. But if that works out, we're going to have something that's over the counter, potentially unbannable. I don't want to give FDA any ideas because they can ban whatever they want. But it's hard to ban pyruvate, and it's hard to ban acetoacetate. These are natural metabolites inside of the body. So they have to get really creative to ban it. It'll be like banning glucose. You cannot eat beyond a certain amount of glucose because it's a prescription drug. If we get it to that level, then civilization's finished. If you cannot eat more than 50 grams of glucose because the FDA doesn't approve of it, then it's game over. So we'll see. That's one study. And then they've restarted the study with DHT in Taiwan because it was shut down because of the virus. So now it's being restarted. Unfortunately, I paid for something and threw some money down the drain because after the study was paused, you cannot tell these animals to wait, and then restart. They have to be euthanized, and now we're starting from scratch. So we'll see what happens with that one. Yeah, but so what else I'm working on? Fatty acid oxidation inhibitor. So one has already been synthesized, and there are publications on it. I can send them to you, and then you can post them on the page for people that want to. So it's basically works the same way as the drug meldonium / mildronate. It depletes the levels of L-carnitine, which is the amino acid without which you cannot oxidize long-chain fatty acids. But it's about 20 times more potent than meldonium. And it's very effective in very low doses, and the effect lasts for several days. But since this is already a molecule that's been synthesized, published about, we wanted to do something beyond that. So we're going to synthesize something completely new, our own thing, hopefully even more potent. At least the results based on what we're seeing right now, we'll be able to do something that's about 100 to 200 times more potent than meldonium, and without any of the side effects associated with these molecules. At least that's how it's being synthesized. We'll see what happens in the in vivo tests. But long story short, in about a month, I may have the first this already published fatty acid oxidation inhibitor. By the way, it was created by the same group that created meldonium. It's an interesting story. So if you look at, so the compound is called methyl GBB. If you Google for methyl dash G as in George, B as in boy, B as in boy, the studies will immediately come up. And you'll see that the creator was one of the students of the professor who invented meldonium back in the 1960s in Latvia. So it's still a Latvian, another Latvian created this molecule. I think it's kind of like it was a bit of a competition. I guess he just wanted to one up his teacher and say, I could do better, right? It's a fairly benign molecule. It's basically it's an analog of L-carnitine. That's how it works, and basically it blocks that enzyme that synthesizes L-carnitine from the precursor gamma butyrobetane. The equivalent daily human dosage is about 100 milligrams. For meldonium is about gram to 2 grams to get the really serious carnitine depletion effects, or many athletes use it as doping for the same reason, right? And this thing works, at 100 milligrams daily, and more importantly, the effects, even from one dosage, extend for about 2-3 days. So we should be able to have that for sale in the next month or two. But my goal is, this is just to give people a taste of what's coming. My goal is to have that other one that's much more potent and designed to not really have any of the known side effects of these chemicals, to be available sometime in the fall. And if that works, then of course we're going to do a study with it with cancer and everything else. But who knows? Maybe Pyroset will make this whole thing meaningless. If it turns out that it can cure cancer, then I don't know. I don't know if we're going to continue that project. We probably will, just out of curiosity. But if Pyroset works, then I think that would be big news. Like I said, that may finally get shut down, because I will try to publish that in a reputable journal. Which, by the way, I now realize why it costs $10,000 to have a manuscript submitted to Nature.
No.
Did you know that? Like $10,000 doesn't mean it's going to get approved. Actually, it doesn't even guarantee that it's going to get read. You're paying $10,000 just to submit something, and yes, usually they'll review it, but there's very low chance of approval. So the vast majority, so Nature makes a lot of money by telling people no, and just for the privilege of getting something submitted there. Now, I'm not going to spend $10,000. I just don't have that money. But if we get a blockbuster results like Pyroset or that other chemical curing one of those cancers, I may start a Patreon, or like you, or see if the community is willing to chip in for publication, not for synthesizing, but for publication.
So if we don't hear from you in the next few months, you either got Reginald Denny'd on the streets of Washington, D.C., or you discovered the cure for cancer and you disappeared.
Well, either way, it does not look like a bright future for me.
Yeah.
Or I retired on a private island where I treat extremely rich people, and it's being kept under wraps. You can only tell by seeing super yachts going in a specific direction in the Pacific Ocean.
Good stuff. At least we know. That's the important thing. Okay, so idealabsdc.com. Check that out. t.me/Danny Roddy, my Telegram, my what is this called? Twitter, at Danny Roddy. Instagram, this is just for food stuff, so I've just been cataloging food for a long time on here that I've found in various places. So people are always like mystified by dietary things. And so these are just anti-inflammatory, anti-stress foods that I'm aware of in various places. And then I do coaching on DannyRoddy.com/resources, although I think it is sold out at the moment. Okay, so we should probably get to the super chats, unless you wanted to mention anything before we get there.
I mean, but might as well start that because I'm sure you'll take some time to answer.
I don't think we have that many. If you want to do a super chat, now is definitely the time. Thank you guys so much. These support the show. You like the ability to do this, and so I sincerely appreciate it. Let me switch screens here. Okay. Mateo, I won't even try Weichers. I don't know how to say your last name. For 20 pesos, thank you so much, Mateo. He says, please talk about high serotonin after herpes virus.
Well, actually, I think the high serotonin is what's allowing the virus to actually manifest itself. It's largely dormant. The herpes virus usually lives in your nervous system, peripheral nervous system. Sometimes it can travel to the brain, and then if it gets reactivated there, it can create a very nasty thing called herpetic encephalitis. High mortality rate, about 30%, but it's rare. It tends to be rare unless you're using arginine or a nitroglycerin or any kind of like a nitric oxide increasing supplement/drugs, because that's what reactivates the virus. But recent studies have found that serotonin is actually required for a viral infection to take hold. Now, some people will say, well, hold on, you're already carrying the herpes virus. Yes, but it's dormant. It's living in your nervous system. In order for it to start to flood the bloodstream and actually start getting into the cells and causing the cell to produce more virus so it can go and infect others. In order to actually trigger an active viral infection, serotonin is required. And there are multiple studies showing that serotonin antagonists can block, either fully prevent a viral infection from happening or stop an already progressing one in its tracks, including ones with herpes virus. So I don't think serotonin is elevated only after the herpes virus. I think that's when the tests were done and people thought, oh, maybe herpes is causing the serotonin to elevate, which is true. It's true. They actually have a positive feedback mechanism. Any kind of a stress reaction in the organism will tend to increase serotonin. But serotonin and nitric oxide always go together. So if you have an active herpes infection, usually means nitric oxide was elevated. And I don't know of a case where nitric oxide can get elevated without serotonin also getting elevated, because nitric oxide stimulates the activity of tryptophan hydroxylase. So if your herpes virus got reactivated, it means NO was high, which also means serotonin was also high before herpes, you even had the herpes outbreak.
Good stuff. Thank you for that, Mateo. Daniel Gallagher says, for $5, thank you so much, Daniel. He says, Georgie, what would you take to protect yourself from vaccines? Heard you and Ray slightly discuss this. Any long-term repercussions from vaccines?
There are many. I mean, I think if you listen to that portion of the episode, he basically said that the adjuvants and just the immune response in a weakened person can actually create long-term subsequent waves, to use this, right? And basically, it can also be transgenerational, but it's really the inflammatory reaction that's the worst. That's the worst thing, and that's what can cause systemic issues. Aside from the aluminum that gets deposited in your bones and your brain, it's not that big of an amount. That part can probably get chelated by things like succinic acid. Malic acid, which is present in apple and pear, and I think even grape juice. So aside from the aluminum adjuvant, it's handling the systemic inflammatory reaction, which is what the vaccine is really. That's the goal of the vaccine, to trigger this immune response and to make your immune system be familiar with the weakened pathogen. That's crap. Basically, it's that activation of the immune system, especially if you're already in a compromised state of health, that actually can trigger the cytokine storm, and that can lead to death. So you can get COVID-19, well, the SARS, basically the severe acute respiratory syndrome, even without COVID-19. One of these vaccines can do that if it's administered to you when you're in a metabolically weakened state. So systemically anti-inflammatory chemicals are likely to be universally helpful. Aspirin is probably a great one. I think pregnenolone, I'm starting to recognize more and more pregnenolone's role as a very, very powerful, very upstream anti-inflammatory steroid. And many people know about the original studies with rheumatoid arthritis back in like the 40s and 50s. And they said that the reason it got dropped was because cortisol was much more effective. Yes, but if you look at the way cortisol worked, it was by suppressing the immune system. And pregnenolone works through a different method. And basically, it restrains your it protects you from endotoxin exposure, and also modulates the immune response in such a way that it doesn't suppress it. It does not make you less. It does not make you more susceptible to infection. In fact, it increases the immune response to bacterial and fungal pathogens, while at the same time dampening down excessive inflammatory response. So I think pregnenolone will be great as a protective measure both before and after receiving the vaccine. Obviously, I would much rather prefer to take it before the vaccine, at least an hour or so, if possible, for several days before getting the vaccine. I think getting like keeping the free fatty acids low is also very important, because for the majority of us, because of the accumulation of PUFA, many of these fatty acids circulating in the blood will be PUFA, right? So they'll be contributing to the inflammation response and the shock reaction and the stress reaction. So either taking niacinamide, drinking something sweet, orange juice will probably be great, or basically like eating like a decent, maybe like 2 spoons of coconut oil, because if the goal is to get the ratio of saturated fats to unsaturated fats in your blood as high as possible, before, during, and after the vaccine for the first 24 to 48 hours. So taking, 2 spoons of coconut oil about an hour before is probably great. But, many people are, when they're about to get the vaccine, there are other things on their mind they tend to forget. So if they're simple things you need to remember is drink something sweet, right? And or take aspirin, preferably both. Those two are probably the simplest, most systemically protected things you can do. And if you remember, pregnenolone would work, progesterone would work. I think methylene blue would be a great one too. A recent study found that methylene blue has the highest, the broadest spectrum of anti-inflammatory activity than anything else that study looked at. And I thought, we haven't checked aspirin, and indeed they hadn't. But they compare it to a number of different pharmaceutical drugs like indomethacin, disulfiram, many different anti than all of them. So methylene blue would probably be helpful in this situation as well. Oops.
Hey, are you still there? Are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, well, I think we had a hiccup, and so I think we're still good. You guys are still with us in the chat? Yeah, I think we're good. We had just a slight internet connection. You're there, right?
Yeah, that was weird because it actually dropped the connection and redialed without me doing anything.
Okay, yeah, it says I think I was telling Georgie this before we started, but even though I'm plugged in via Ethernet, it was giving me periodic dropouts. I have no idea why. And so yeah, I think we're good. Okay, sorry to interrupt your train of thought, but do you remember where you're going?
Yeah, I was saying methylene blue would be a great anti-inflammatory in addition to aspirin. But if you have to remember, if most people have access to aspirin and sweet stuff, even if they're under stress and their mind is occupied with other things. So if you cannot do anything else, orange juice and aspirin before the vaccine, and then for the first few days after that is probably the best you can do with things that are over the counter. Anything else, such as cyproheptadine, of course, any anti-serotonin, and anything that reduces the synthesis of nitric oxide or scavenges, such as methylene blue, which is probably one of the reasons why it has these anti-inflammatory effects. Anything like that would help. It's just a matter of what you have access to immediately before and after getting that vaccine. Truth be told, if it gets to the point of COVID-19 vaccine, coronavirus being mandatory, just like Ray, I think I'm going to pack up and leave, because with the sophistication of technology that has occurred over the last 10 years, there is no telling what would be inside that vaccine. And for most people, even advanced labs around the world, it will be near impossible to even test and verify what's in there. Nanotechnology is at the point where the military can probably inject you with, I don't know, a chip or something else that can, emit waves, be like a transceiver receiver, and be this nanorobot floating around inside of your body for as long as you're alive, and you would never know it. You'll be undetectable to most modern technology. That's how advanced things have gotten into the military/intelligence world. So if it gets to getting forcefully injected with a modern vaccine that has been so politicized and pushed by people like Bill Gates and everybody else that's has a hidden interest in pushing these things, I would just say no and leave.
Yeah, so we can move on, but somebody I was listening to was like, what hill are you going to die on? Is it the mask hill, not wearing the mask? Is it social distancing? And even though we don't really know what's going to happen if you somehow, I mean, there has to be some way not to take it, like what kind of life are those people going to be subject to if they do not take the vaccine? Like, is it even plausible to live, like what kind of access will they be cut off to? But
I think the good news is that we're underestimating the percentage of people in the United States who are actually actively mistrusting the vaccines at this point. Mm-hmm. There was an article that came out recently that said that some people are horrified. Some people in the government, meaning at CDC, are horrified that apparently up to 30% of Americans are seriously questioning whether they're going to get any other vaccine aside from the ones that they've already gotten. So that may be the reason why this will never become mandatory. It's like a significant minority population will say, go screw yourself, I'm not doing it.
Well, the point I'm getting at is like you have to choose it's hard to say this without the vaccine actually being out, but like you have to make a choice on the hill you're going to die on, and right. And for me, it's not, I don't care about necessarily wearing a mask, even though I prefer not to wear one, but I would like to say no matter what, I will not get a vaccine, but I guess we'll see how bad it is when they actually come out with something.
I mean, I don't want to tempt fate, but I don't know of a single person around me who basically got the coronavirus and had complications, even though I'm sure many did, because there are these things now, they call them COVID toes. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've seen this. COVID toes or COVID fingers. Mm-hmm. The tips of your fingers or your toes become like bright red. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you've dipped them into red ink. And I noticed people around me have been getting this for like months, right? And then it disappears. So I'm presuming majority of people around me, some of them in compromised health state, got the coronavirus, and it was never an issue. So, hello.
There's Cher. She's probably wanting to go get some street food. Keep going.
So, yes, fried in coconut oil or like soy oil?
Man, this is a big contentious point of our relationship. I was trying to tell her that like old traditional Thai like only use coconut oil, but like everything she eats is just like slathered in polyunsaturated fats, and so.
Remember what I told you? My grandmother, rest in peace, she said, in a relationship, you can be right or you can be happy.
That's a good piece of advice. Yeah, man. Okay, good stuff. We could probably talk about that all day. Okay, so this one's from Elliot Cactus for $7.99 Australian. Thank you so much, Elliot. He says, any foods/supplements worth consuming or avoiding when using psychedelics, e.g. LSD, psilocybin, mescaline, at moderate to high doses?
Yeah, because some of them tend to act on the serotonin system. I would try to avoid things that could potentially trigger a serotonin syndrome. So I would not use methylene blue with anything psychotropic because it is a known inhibitor of monoamine oxidase type A, and in high doses on its own is known to trigger serotonin syndrome, but it usually, when it's used on its own, it requires dosages such as used in a hospital to revive people from shock. That's like 300 to 500 milligrams intravenously and as a single dose. But also, methylene blue has been known at lower dosages to also trigger serotonin syndrome when co-administered with other things that have that effect of either promoting synthesis of serotonin or inhibiting its degradation. So methylene blue and SSRI, a big no-no. Methylene blue and basically things that like a high tryptophan food. I would not do that. So again, because we don't know many of these the psychotropic, the hallucinogenic drugs or like the natural supplements that do that, like the psilocybin, DMT, etc. They do act on a portion of the serotonin system, and I would not risk. I mean, I don't know of any study that says that methylene blue will be dangerous when taken with them, but just because they act on the same system, I would not risk it. I think also eating high theremin foods is also not a good idea. So like aged cheeses, chocolate, wines, especially wines with a lot of like what are called, like not sulfites, but they use them to sterilize the wine, preservatives. Yes. So especially white wines tend to have them a lot. But you can actually look at the wine, and the label usually says if it has like preservatives, they'll say artificial or natural preservatives. And some wines don't have it on the label. The ones that do, I'll try to avoid. So in general, anything that would tend to increase the synthesis of serotonin or inhibit its degradation, I would avoid with hallucinergics. Worst case scenario, I mean, if you're really concerned, you can take those hallucinergics with a low dosage of cyproheptadine, not too high because it's going to kill the trip. So that's how we know the serotonin system is involved. But about 1 milligram to 2 milligrams have been shown to not stop the trip, but also prevent the development of serotonin syndrome. That has been done in humans too. So you can try that as a precautionary mechanism. But in general, yeah, those would be the foods that I would avoid, and I would avoid methylene blue. Let's see, there is actually some evidence that coenzyme Q10 can also interact with the monoamine oxidase system, but it tends to inhibit monoamine oxidase type B more than it does A. Nonetheless, if you're taking grams of CoQ10 to treat Parkinson's disease or some other condition, then I would also be careful with the hallucinergics.
Good stuff. We're definitely going to have to work on that D-Live alternate. We're talking about illicit drug use. We're talking about anti-vaccines. Right. We're talking about
inciting people to do that.
Conspiracy theories.
What exactly are you selling in that idea labs?
Man.
What's the code word for vitamin K? Oh, you mean special K. That's what you're talking about.
Good stuff. Thank you so much for that question, Elliot. Joe Smith for $10, I think Canadian. He says, when I use topical caffeine like Solban on my scalp, I notice new hair growth within days. But I also get a dry mouth and a pale tongue. Same with too much vitamin B7 or vitamin E. What do you use to top dash calf? I don't understand that. Top calf without dry mouth.
Well, a dry mouth is typically a symptom of anticholinergic activity, and caffeine is a known anticholinergic. It blocks a number of different acetylcholine receptors. It's not as strong as cyproheptadine or Benadryl. Those things will definitely give you dry mouth. In fact, that they used for excessive sweating. But caffeine, because you're applying it directly on the scalp and it absorbs very well there, it's likely to affect anything in the head a lot more than it will do like peripherally. Let's see. You can try taking a little bit of vitamin B1 with it, or take the B1 orally, and maybe about 30 minutes before you apply the caffeine. And vitamin B1 has a slight cholinergic activity, not enough to be dangerous. As we know, the overactivation of the cholinergic system leads to depression, but it's also one of the two primary systems through which estrogen works, the other one being histamine. So a little bit of vitamin B1 before using the caffeine would work. And also, I don't know if you saw my recent post on using an anti-estrogens topically for hair growth. That would be another thing to consider. So things like a topical progesterone or topical aspirin. Caffeine also has an estrogenic effect, but a more direct anti-estrogen, or maybe even like a mushroom extract being applied on the scalp. That would be probably a good thing. That I don't think it because it's not known to cause any of these side effects that you mentioned for caffeine.
Yeah, didn't Ray mention silymarin? That's not mushroom, but silymarin, like topical.
Yeah, silymarin is a milk thistle.
Yeah.
So basically, it's the active ingredient in milk thistle. So you can try that too. And none of these are known to cause these like the dry mouth or the pale tongue. So you can use a lower amount of caffeine combined with these other things to get the same effect by using less of each. But I wouldn't know what the ratios would be.
Thank you for that, Georgie. Thank you, Joe Smith. Thank you so much. Kirk333, thank you so much, Kirk, chronic supporter of the show. A lot of these super chats are. Thank you guys. For $5, he says, for both of you, if there were one thing you could change about your health, what would it be, and how would you approach changing it?
Well, actually, it's very simple, but very hard to do. I would limit stress that's hard. I mean, for me, it's impossible to avoid. Having a day job, working in this environment, and having a side job and a family. None of these things really are subject to much change. Let children don't tolerate. You can't pivot around your family. You just can't. If you care about the family, if you don't care about your family, then I guess you can. But then you're already in a compromised state of health if you're in that mindset, right? So there are things that it's very hard for me to avoid. I do what I can, but it's juggling. And ideally, I would like to basically be able to drop things for let's say 2 weeks and not worry about any of those things on a daily basis. It's really, I can appreciate how detrimental to my health that is, because every once in a while I go out of town for a few days, even if it's work related. I'm basically not bothered by any of these things for a few days. And the moment I come back, I realize just how stressful that environment I came out of was. And it's really depressing, actually, because I know I have to go back and I really don't want to. So to me, the systemic stress is probably the fundamental factor behind all disease. And if I could change that, I would, because to me it beats any other patchwork that we're doing with supplements, including thyroid. So diet is probably the only other very systemic thing but I already have that more or less taken care of. But the stress of interacting with others, and especially in this environment, like you said, I'm in the middle of riots, and you can feel the agitation of the people around you. And as we've discussed before, brainwaves, people actually they can synchronize their brainwaves. So if you're among and around agitated people all the time who are mentally ill, depressed, angry, raging, and so on, it's very hard to keep a healthy state of mind.
Yeah, my immediate thought to this question is like, oh, I wish I had a new body. That's how I feel given my various health struggles over many years. But I'm not trying to cop out to this question, but I also would have learned like literally nothing had I not had those struggles. And so it's like kind of a catch-22. And I wouldn't have gone on a path of like just this gradual development over time. And also, my life is completely guided by me. And so anything that happens, it's really just blaming myself. I have no outside source to blame, given my specific circumstances. And so I'm like you, yeah, like this, Thailand is not a place I would recommend coming to like be healthy, but I came here, if I could take some qualities of Thailand and import or export them to Mexico, like that would be ideal. And Mexico is a great place, but I was just a little bit, I don't think lonely is the right word. There's just like not a lot of novelty there. And for me, that was kind of draining over time. And so I would wake up, answer email, like watch YouTube, answer more email, do some kind of project, and then go to bed. So it was just kind of boring.
Well, I tell you that I wasn't seeing any beautiful girls walking around your room when you were in Mexico, and I do see them now. So you have improved your life.
I have improved my life by 1%. So, yeah. So it's interesting question for sure, but yeah, I just never would have got into Ray without being sick. Never would have started this podcast and things like that. So I'm trying to say I don't like regret anything or wish something was specifically different, because if I were to do that, I would be like negating the development of my present self, So, yeah.
So if I can rephrase, I wish I was more in your situation. In other words, for things to depend on me, because right now I feel like there are many things that don't depend on me, and I'm trying every day to wring control back into my own hands. And total control is probably like a utopia, but I definitely want it to be more than what it is right now. It's like if you know what's wrong and you know how you can change it, but you're not being allowed to, that's a very annoying state of mind to be in. So you'll give you a neurosis, or you're going to start ignoring it, which neither one of these is really a good solution.
That's why you take your family, you move to Mexico, and we set up an orange juice stand. And all of... Go ahead.
Blake College. Yeah. We will restore Blake College, and then U.S. will invade Mexico, and they'll be the end of it.
Good stuff. Good question. I enjoy questions like those. So thank you, Kirk. Our buddy Drew F for $10, he says, Georgie, I have seen you mention that a higher ratio of progesterone to DHEA has different effects from a lower ratio. How so, and how does a higher ratio affect libido? Furthermore, can progesterone DHEA fully replace pregnenolone?
I'll answer the second question first. Yes, because I've actually seen that progesterone administration can raise levels of pregnenolone because both progesterone and DHEA do not inhibit their own synthesis and actually stimulate their own synthesis and of the steroid, the precursor to them, which is pregnenolone. Now, DHEA, if you abuse it, it will actually lead to suppression because you'll convert to estrogen, and estrogen is highly suppressive. The reason I think, and I've found through experiments, based on studies that gave me the original idea, is that if you look at older studies, I can send them to the people who are interested, lower levels of progesterone were actually suppressive for the gonadal axis, but higher ones had the opposite effect. So in other words, and then I experimentally found that this ratio is about the maximum we can get away with before progesterone starts to overtake DHA and become too sedating, is about 6-to-1 to 8-to-1. Anything lower than that does have a very potent anti-catabolic effect, but it doesn't have a very strong pro-libido effect. In a ratio of 6-to-1 to about 8-to-1, you're getting a very strong pro-libido effect, and I don't think it's coming from the progesterone or DHEA because you can tell by a change in your scrotum. The size of the gonads increases, and you can tell that there's more synthesis endogenously of testosterone or whatever androgens the gonads are producing. So that's my experimentation and based on the studies. But if you do more than 8-to-1, then it starts to become too sedating, and actually it overtakes the effects of DHEA, and you start getting some of the effects of pure progesterone, which is numbing of the penis, basically sometimes even loss of libido, but definitely heavy sedation and very deep sleep without even dreaming, which to me is usually, I know how GABA agonists are supposed to work, and that's one of the effects of them. So anything more than that, because DHA assuming we're limiting the dosage to no more than 5 milligrams per dose, no more than 3 times that 5 milligram dosage per day. If you are limiting yourself to that, then eventually a ratio of higher than 8-to-1 progesterone will overtake the effects of DHEA. But between 6-to-1 and 8-to-1 seems to be optimal for libido / mental health / muscles. Interestingly, the lower ratio, 3-to-1, seems to be more anti-catabolic. The muscles seem more they more defined and more full, but not as good effects on libido as the 6-to-1 to 8-to-1 ratio.
Great stuff. Thank you, Georgie. Thank you, Drew. Jaeger ODA for $1.99 says, opinion on BPC-157 and TB500. I don't know what those are.
I think the first one is a peptide, and the second one is a SARM. Mm-hmm. I thought he already emailed me about it. If that's the same person, I don't like the SARMs. The SARMs, keep in mind, not a single one of them has been approved for any condition anywhere in the world, and there are quite a few of them. There's been a race in the pharmaceutical industry to replace steroids with like these non-steroidal, fully synthetic molecules that bind to the same receptors and presumably have the same effects without the side effects. So they created the SARMs, the selective androgen receptor modulators. They were supposed to be similar to the SERMs, the selective estrogen receptor modulators. But just like the SERMs from the very beginning, the SARMs were plagued by issues, and especially toxicity. And as much as they try to avoid it, actually you can tell by the molecule, most of the SARMs contain either fluorine or chlorine in the molecule. If you do that, you expect automatically liver issues, and virtually all of them have liver toxicity as a side effect. So that's one reason I don't like the SARMs. I don't think, and the fact that no health agency around the world has considered approving even one of them, considering that they've been around for at least 2 decades, speaks to me that they're probably not even less safe than even the corrupt pharmaceutical industry would like to accept it. As far as the peptides, I think they're okay, but most of them have to be administered by injection. So it depends on the quality that you can get. Many times, many of these peptide products, they're done in underground labs, and They have a number of different adjuvants that are in the liquid that people would not admit to, but they're preservatives, and many of them are not good. Many of them are toxic. The polysorbate, 60, 70, and 80. These are the most one of the most widely used preservatives. It's actually in most commercial foods like Burger King, McDonald's. It is a known carcinogen, and in fact, it's been shown that when it's administered intravenously, the carcinogenic effect is amplified because I guess because it goes directly into the bloodstream. So some of it gets destroyed when you're eating it. So orally, it's not as bad. Still bad, still carcinogenic, but it takes decades. Intravenously, you can probably, playing Russian roulette there with an injection of a peptide. I would stick to the steroids. I mean, there are plenty of steroids out there that are, you can do a decent stack if you can get a doctor to prescribe dihydrotestosterone, and then you can, combine it with something like DHEA and pregnenolone or DHA and progesterone. You can get all the effects of the androgenic anabolic steroids while also getting, without many of the side effects, because these are endogenous steroids, and if used appropriately, you can get all the benefits without most of the side effects.
Thank you for that, Georgie, and thank you, Jaeger, for that. Okay, a few more. Gregory, for $19.99, thank you so much, Gregory. Hi, my younger brother seemed to develop some type of autism throughout puberty until now at age 21. Any suggestions on how to combat this? I was thinking cyproheptadine / antibiotics. Should I start with antibiotics first and then cyproheptadine?
I would actually try the charcoal first before you go even into that. I've had a number of clients report remarkable improvement in their children's symptoms of autism just by giving them a capsule of charcoal. Now, I don't know how severe your brother's symptoms were. Clearly, if it's something that's basically got him to the point, you can actually tell if he has frequent nightmares. That's a great, very reliable sign of elevated serotonin, because the body combats the elevated, not combats, but like balances the elevated serotonin by shifting the synthesis of melatonin, which is downstream of serotonin. So if you take a serotonergic drug or do anything that raises serotonin before going to bed, you will usually have nightmares because melatonin is a downstream hormone, and the body knows that high levels of serotonin are not good. So you'll try to I guess do the lesser evils of the two and shift the balance towards melatonin, right? So if he has nightmares, that's usually a good indication of elevated serotonin. So if he has that on a regular basis, then you may want to try the cyproheptadine and the antibiotics. But I would try the charcoal first, and actually charcoal mixed with coconut oil or palmitic or stearic acid. The palmitic one is already present in coconut oil, not in very high quantities, but close enough. But the coconut oil contains lauric acid and myristic acid. Both of these are potent antibacterials. And I think Ray recommended to somebody a long time ago with severe gut dysbiosis. They said that both the coconut oil helped and the charcoal helped separately. And then Ray said, well, you should combine them because basically coconut oil is a strong enough antibacterial to act as an antibiotic if there was a way to deliver it directly into the intestine. But the reason it's because it's so well absorbed and digested, not much of it, if anything, actually gets to the colon, so it loses its disinfectant effects. So enema with coconut oil will be great, but if you don't want to do that, actually taking the coconut oil with the charcoal, because the charcoal would absorb to like a significant portion of the fatty acids in the coconut oil, and you'll prevent them from absorbing, and you'll carry them to the colon. And over there, both the coconut oils and the charcoal will have a strong antibacterial effect, and you may actually do better than antibiotics. I mean, I've tried it myself. I think I wouldn't say it's as potent as something like minocycline, but I would say it's about 70%, there. And without the risks of minocycline, such as, all antibiotics increase the risk of fungal overgrowth if you use them chronically. So if you can get the charcoal and the coconut oil to work, I would stick with that. I mean, there's no reason why not, not to use this. We don't use daily, because charcoal, even if use it to bind with the coconut oil, there's still enough of it free to absorb other nutrients and potentially create vitamin deficiency if you're using it every day. But like 3 to 4 times weekly should be okay and without risk of creating deficiencies. And if that doesn't work, then the antibiotic, the cyproheptadine and Benadryl, and actually even because the serotonin receptor, the most highly expressed one in the gastrointestinal tract is the 5-HT3. You may actually get a better effect with either pure ondansetron or one of the other 5-HT3 antagonists, or a combination of the cyproheptadine and the ondansetron, because even though cyproheptadine is a non-specific serotonin antagonist, its activity on 5-HT3, which is mostly expressed in the GI tract and is such very relevant for autism, it's not very strong. So I've seen studies shown that ondansetron by itself, as animal studies, have very potent reversal effect on autism symptoms. So we can try that in combination with cyproheptadine or on its own. Keep in mind that doses higher than 4 milligrams are not recommended, both because it can prolong the QT interval, which is it's a type of heart rhythm disorder, but also because I think, and Ray confirmed that when I asked him directly in an email about a year ago, in animal studies, the antidepressant effect, which suggests that, since it's coming most likely by opposing serotonin, the antidepressant effect was seen only in doses equivalent up to 3 milligrams daily for a human. Anything higher than that started to affect badly digestion and did not have the positive effects on mood, on reducing inflammation, on reducing autistic symptoms, etc. So if you are using ondansetron, I would say 1 to 2 milligrams daily is probably the most that I would use. And it happens to be the dosage that Ray has recommended to people in the past.
Good stuff. Thank you, Georgie. Thank you, Gregory. Our buddy LAZ, longtime listener, supporter of the show, watcher. Thank you, Ellie. He says, are there dangers to paper bag breathing? It healed my friend's migraine. Any recommendations on how to regularly can't see this. Regularly do them for general health. Good night.
Yeah. So the only dangers that I've seen actually, and they published studies on that with these let's call them breathing modification devices, is that if the bag is too small and it's making you breathing strain, in other words, you have to make a physical exertion to breathe in and out of it. That's a problem, because that strain creates an inflammatory reaction in the lungs and immediately releases nitric oxide and the serotonin, which, by the way, is destroyed in the lungs. It's carried back with the blood from the bloodstream to the lungs, and that's where it's destroyed oxidatively. So if you're straining your lungs or irritating your lungs in any way, you will be creating a systemic inflammatory and serotonergic reaction. So if the breathing in that bag is strained, not feeling that basically you're lacking oxygen, which means that CO2 is building up, but if you actually have to push to either inhale or exhale, that's a bad sign. I would try to use a different bag. Another device that seems to work very well is if you can find a plastic bottle that is at least 2 liters, preferably a gallon in size. So you cut a hole in the bottle, in the bottom of the bottle, and then you basically open like the top of the bottle, and then you turn around and you start breathing through it, right? So the air will keep coming in and out, but because over time the carbon dioxide will accumulate, it's heavier than air, and it will actually stay in the bottle. So you will not get as much as hell. So over time you'll get this mini tank of carbon dioxide that will basically, like, we can breathe through it, and you will feel like you're breathing through a paper bag. But it's actually, I found it's actually easier. I felt like I was getting more carbon dioxide that way. More importantly, when you're done breathing, you just close the top of the bottle, right? Make sure, and then you can tilt it down with the neck pointing downwards. The carbon dioxide will stay in the bottle. So next time when you're actually ready to do that, you just put it sideways again, open the bottle, and start breathing again. The carbon dioxide will already be there. With the paper bag and any other bag, you actually have to breathe, depending on how much carbon dioxide you produce. You may have to breathe for a while before you get to a point where you're getting a decent amount of carbon dioxide. But this way you can actually have like a pre-made tank, and it will sit there, and it doesn't have to be closed as long as the opening is over the carbon dioxide and doesn't allow it to escape.
Great stuff. Thank you for that. Okay, and thank you, Ellie, for that question. Roots K9 for $4.99. Thank you so much, Roots. They say, what can I do to decrease inflammation in the small intestine?
Well, it depends what's driving it. If it's bacterial overgrowth, then I think it's it may be worth considering something like increasing the acidity, which is most cases of small intestine bacterial overgrowth are due to insufficient production of gastric acid. So things that would increase the production of gastric acid is increasing the levels of carbon dioxide. They're actually intimately connected. They're almost perfectly correlated. Salt deficiency can cause reduction in gastric acid. So eating enough table salt, chloride is needed for that production. Taking thiamine, the hydrochloride salt, also helps increase that. Anything that restores the proper production of carbon dioxide and the stomach acid tends to, take care of the SIBO. Whether it's going to be permanent or not depends on whether you restore metabolism or not, because ultimately that lack of carbon dioxide, which manifests in a lack of gastric acid, is driven by low metabolism. But the immediate things that you can do to remediate that would be to increase the production of gastric acid, and those are some of the interventions that you can do. Other things that I've found to help is some trying to eat some extra vinegar. Unfortunately, if you have like an ulcer or any kind of irritation of the esophagus, eating extra vinegar can be problematic there. But if that's not the issue, then you can usually increasing vinegar in your food is fine. I think that's one of the reasons actually Ray may be recommending the carrot salad with vinegar, because vinegar doesn't do anything to help carry the carrot through the intestine. It can do it on its own, but the vinegar actually helps with sterilizing the small intestine. And the carrot is keeping the vinegar from getting absorbed and metabolized in the stomach. Mm-hmm. So you can actually, the carrot plays the role of the charcoal, as I explained in the previous example with the coconut oil. It's the carrot that plays that role of absorbent and carries the vinegar to the small intestine so you can sterilize it.
Great stuff. Shailene Butterworth for $4.99. She says, our family continues to learn so much from you too. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. We appreciate you both. Thank you for that. Sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you.
Linda Bell for $2. No message. Thank you so much, Linda. Appreciate it. Michael for $20. Wow. Thank you, Michael. He says, thank you, Danny and Georgie. Thank you, Michael. Sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oren Frazier for I don't know. $5 says, best idea labs for post heart attack.
Ooh, let's see. Well, it really depends on the damage and what condition the heart was in before that. I mean, if it was just a heart attack that was driven by a blood clot, instead of basically the heart already being fibrotic, and you can get a heart attack from a clot, you can get a heart attack from the heart already starting to fail, from in the initial stages of heart failure. So if there's any kind of fibrosis, I would say anything that opposes serotonin would be good. Vitamin K seems to be getting a lot of recent attention in regards to health of the cardiovascular system. And it has a known antifibrotic effect and a known soft tissue decalcifying effect. But usually if there is a heart attack, I would check the hormonal balance, because without an exception, people that have had heart attacks and have had their hormones tested had elevated estradiol. And more often than not, also had elevated cortisol. So, if this is a situation where it was driven by, basically the increase in catabolic hormones, like these two, then something like, I don't know, progesterone and or DHEA to restore the balance. It depends. He didn't say if it was like a male or female, right? But either way, I would try to check the steroids and vitamin D and cholesterol and see if there is a hormonal imbalance. More often than not, there is. And then depending on how severe the estrogen excess is, because like I said, every single time that person has heart attack has been tested, estrogen was high. Either if it's a female, then I think high dose pure progesterone would probably be one of the best things. And then if it's a male, then I would try like a progesterone DHEA. Probably will be safer to the 8-to-1 ratio that we have, which we call Corninum Plus. And then vitamin D, there's a study in the early 80s that actually showed that every single person whose vitamin D levels were above 45 survived a heart attack, no matter how severe it was. So I think that goes a long way of demonstrating how important vitamin D is for at least post heart attack state. And I think it's important for preventing it as well because, as many people know, vitamin D is a steroid, and it's known to activate the progesterone and androgen receptors while simultaneously decreasing the activity or the effectiveness of estrogen and cortisol binding to their own receptors and working there. So it's like you're getting like a combination of a testosterone and progesterone simultaneously with an anti-cortisol and like an anti-estrogen. So it's a really very versatile steroid, and we need to start calling it more like the steroid cholecalciferol, like no more vitamin D.
Good stuff. Thank you for that, Oren. YouTube does. Okay, let me zoom in. Okay, Janet for $20. Thank you so much, Janet. Longtime supporter of the show. Same with Oren and same with a lot of these people. Thank you so much, guys. Janet says, thank you, Georgie. I found your post on RP Forum on nerve pain. Had shingles recently and couldn't control the nerve pain this week. Found the post you said niacinamide / lysine, which I just ordered, and the niacinamide helped. Yeah. So maybe riff on that a little bit.
Yes, I mean, I think the reason niacinamide helps is by improving the redox state, right? And improving the energetic balance, because nerve pain is shown to be an energetic problem, and the lysine I'm probably mentioning in the context of opposing arginine, because sometimes the nerve pain can be driven by reactivation of the herpes virus. But more recent studies, this is a very old post. I think it's like from circa 2015. I don't know where people find these posts. I mean, I barely remember them myself. But more recent ones have shown that GABA agonists are pretty good. There's even a drug approved for nerve pain called Lyrica. It's basically the generic name is pregabalin. It's basically a GABA agonist. So progesterone should be great for nerve pain, and is known, in fact, to help with many different neuropathies and nerve pain conditions. And another recent study found that nerve pain is often driven by insulin resistance, which is just the medical name for elevated free fatty acids and insufficient metabolism of glucose, for which niacinamide should help, and it works greatly when combined with aspirin. So those will be I think aspirin and niacinamide can be tried immediately, and the lysine. And then, depending whether you have progesterone or not, you can try that as well. Magnesium is also good in terms of, helping with nerve pain. It's an anesthetic by itself, but it also acts on the GABA system. And then what else? Methylene blue has had some recent studies in regards to nerve pain and nerve damage as well. More for nerve damage, but if there's chronic nerve pain, that usually means there's some kind of a pathological process going on. So methylene blue can be tried too. But I would start with niacinamide, aspirin, maybe add progesterone, and that should usually take care of it.
Great stuff. Thank you, Janet. Appreciate that. Anne Sweeney Jordan for $3.99. She says, what causes head pressure and what can help?
There are many different causes of head pressure. One of the most common ones is during stress, the pituitary increases in size, and that can actually literally put pressure, and usually manifests by pain at the base of the sockets of the eyes. In terms of head pressure, other things that can cause it are actually, inflammation in the sinuses or the eustachian tubes, like in your ears. So it's sometimes like an ear, nose, throat problem, even though it manifests as a sensation in the head. So it really depends. If it's like an allergic reaction, which is affecting the respiratory system, like like I said, the ear, nose, throat, I would try just antihistamine like Benadryl, see if that helps. And if it's something like the pituitary increasing in as a result of chronic stress, then maybe progesterone would be like a good thing to try, especially because it's known to suppress the release of the pituitary hormones that have a positive feedback mechanism with themselves. Prolactin being the most important one. If you can lower prolactin, that typically has a very strong quieting effect on the pituitary gland. Same with TSH, and progesterone is great for all of these.
Chat is talking about my knees right now, so we'll just move on. Okay, where's this other one? Oh, that was from Ann. Thank you so much, Ann. Appreciate it. $3.99. Another one from Oren. Thank you, Oren, for $5. He says, how to get rid of thrush or phlegm that is chronic, dash mouth and sinuses.
So thrush, like thrush is usually in the mouth. What about the sinuses?
How to get rid of thrush or phlegm that is chronic, dash mouth, and so maybe constant like swollen sinuses or stuffed up nose.
Yeah, it's a classic sign of either intestinal irritation and or allergic reaction. Mm-hmm. And many people think they're getting allergies when in reality it's intestinal irritation. Basically, any of the intestinal remedies that we've mentioned so far. Usually, actually, just a little bit of aspirin helps tremendously. For some reason, the aspirin is preventing many of the irritating. Actually, it's not preventing, but there are older studies, and I think that's the mechanism behind it. The aspirin increases the tolerance of the gastrointestinal tract to irritants. So if you're conditioned with aspirin, if you're taking aspirin on a semi-regular basis, if you haven't yet, you start doing it, your GI tract tends to become very resistant to even strong irritants, such as even undiluted alcohol. Now, I'm not saying take aspirin and then test how strong your stomach is, but if you haven't tried it yet, that's one of the first things I would try. And then if that doesn't work, actually gelatin seems to have also a very good both anti-irritant effect in the GI tract and also anti-allergic effect as well. Both glycine and proline are known to decrease allergic reactions, and so in some cases they can protect, even like in the case of anaphylactic shock. So dietary measures will be try the glycine as well, and it can be tried with aspirin, even high dose aspirin, because the glycine protects from some of the irritating effects that aspirin may have on the GI tract itself, or the starch that's in the aspirin. You're unlikely to find 100% pure aspirin. It will very at least will have some cornstarch in it. And then if that doesn't help, then I'll try the antihistamines. I've had quite a few people tell me that Benadryl cured their food allergies, and basically their sinuses are now open and whatnot. And then you can also try the simple remedy that the thing we showed the YouTube video several times. You basically hold your nose, right? You hold your breath, and after about 20 to 30 seconds, you start tilting your head left and right 10 times each in each direction, and then you do a full circle clockwise and then counterclockwise, and then you release your nose and see if that helps. It's usually pretty good at clearing up the sinuses and any kind of congestion that's there.
Yeah, I on my solo stream, I talked about aspirin desensitization therapy. And so people with chronic sinusitis, they use higher, like increasingly bigger doses of aspirin. And ironically, like Ray always mentioned aspirin for sleep. And in the last year or two, that's become like so essential for me to get to sleep really quickly. But for a long time, it didn't help at all. And so I don't know what's changed now about my body, but now I really try to take at least 500 milligrams before I go to bed. And then the only other thing I would add is the sinusitis. That's pretty connected to like either a fungal infection sometimes or a bacterial infection. And so, like you talked about earlier, like maybe antibiotics or a flowers of sulfur, which is like antifungal, might have a big effect if the nostrils are always clogged, I think. Okay. Thank you so much, Oren. You're still there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, oh no, you dropped out. Okay. This one's.
I just never moved. It looked like a statue.
I have like PTSD from our broken internet connection. Okay. This one is from Michelle for $10. Thank you so much, Michelle. He says, do you know the origin of perceive, think, act? I could not find it on Dr. Pete's or RPF website. Thank you for doing the show. Yeah, I'm almost positive that's from
the Mind and Tissue book, where he said that basically people keep telling you have to have a plan for your life. And it matches perfectly well with what I just said earlier about a sexologist saying you have to plan your sex life. Mm-hmm. And he was talking in terms of general plan about life. He said it's pretty obvious that because the world is constantly changing, the only real plan that you can have is perceive, think, act.
Oh, so there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. No, it went silent again. Sorry. He might have written it in Mind and Tissue, but where I was going to go with that is he definitely said it in one of Karen's interviews on her website, Vision and Acceptance. And so she was saying, with all like the kind of protocols on the internet, aren't you afraid that you're going to be taken as an authority? And he says something like, I always try to make the context clearer because everybody's context is different. And then when somebody is saying my protocol for something, if somebody on the internet is saying that Ray Peat has a protocol for something, you know that they're confusing him with an authority. And then he says the only protocol is perceive, think, act. And so that phrase, he might have said it again in Mind and Tissue. That's like one of the books I'm the most sketchy on, but I'm positive that's from a Karen interview.
Let's see. Oh, there's actually a website, perceivethinkact.com.
That's Brad and Jeremy's movie website. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he said authoritarians talk about protocols, but the only valid protocol would be something like perceive, think, act.
Yeah.
Direct quote.
Yeah. If you go to Vision Acceptance, I don't know if Karen still has those interviews on. She might have moved them to a different website called raypeatinsight.com. I don't know if that website is still up. Let me actually just check. Ray Peat Insight. Yeah, it's still up. If you just type in raypeatinsight.com, you'll find it. Good stuff. Okay, that was from Michelle for $10. Thank you so much, Michelle. Dylan Morrison, chronic supporter. Thank you, Dylan, for $5. He says, Georgie and Danny, you guys are outstanding. Keep it up. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Dylan. Thank you for watching. Chris H., another long chronic supporter, for $15 Australian. He says, you're a wizard, Danny. Thank you, Chris. Another one from Dylan, $2.
It's the knee. I bet you it's the knee.
That must be it. Dylan says, oh, and nice hair, Danny. Thank you, Dylan. Sean M. for $5 says, hey, guys, best way to treat vertigo and having a stroke?
Oh, the vertigo is usually heavily influenced by serotonin. So, in fact, some drugs in Europe that are being sold, they're actually serotonergic, but if you look at their pharmacological profile, they're antagonists on the 5-HT1D receptor, which I think, and I think that's actually the receptor that's involved most likely in the pathology of the vertigo. The drug Dramamine, which they sell here in the United States for vertigo, it also has that effect. It's a partially anti-serotonergic, in my experience, pregnenolone helps a lot with vertigo. I don't know why. I suspect, indirectly it's somehow acting against serotonin. Pete seems to agree with it. He said in a few interviews basically that pregnenolone's antidepressant effect was through opposition of cortisol and serotonin. But you're not going to find anything in terms of receptor activity of pregnenolone directly against serotonin. Or at least I couldn't. If you could, that would be great. But my personal experience and people that have asked me is that if you start getting like these, vertigo episodes, usually it's basically serotonin either from intestinal irritation, or from like extreme stress that can cause vertigo as well. But it's all tied to ultimately to serotonin acting through that 5-HT1D receptor.
Okay. Guys, give this episode a like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and you'll be entered in the Tocovit giveaway. And thank you to Georgie Dinkov for providing those bottles of Tocovit. And you should be in the U.S. And if you're not in the U.S. and you do win and you want to pay for shipping, that would be good. And we'll cover shipping if it's anywhere in the U.S. And then DBO 514 was the winner this week. Okay, so the schedule coming up will be me being doing a solo show next week, and then Ray Peat after that. And I think we're going to try to keep this schedule of like a Georgie episode, a solo episode, and then a Ray Peat one, and try to call it that for a week or a month rather, because I think that covers a lot of bases. And then take 1 week off after that. So with all that said, Georgie Dinkov, parting words.
Well, I don't know what to say. I mean, I'm in the middle of crazy town, so. But also, I mean, I is a little bit, like I said before, I felt encouraged over the last several months because I think people are starting to question, if so many things they've been lied about now are coming to light, what else could be a lie as well? We're not there yet, I think, for people questioning medical authorities, at least not like the mass of the population, but they already sense that something is inherently wrong. And I'm hoping that these protests will lead to that, because I've already heard people on the street saying that, oh my God, if they can lie to us about that, what else they can lie to us about? So it's individual people on the street, but I never heard anybody say that, let's say 5 years ago. It was strictly, you're either with us or you're against us. In other words, you either follow the rules or you're a wacko or whatnot. I'm still a wacko in most people's eyes, but now I'm like, this wacko makes sense every once in a while. Before I was, never making sense. I was the enemy of the people. And now more and more people around me are basically taking things seriously. And more importantly, not because they're coming from me, they're starting to dig into these studies that I sent them, and they're starting to ask their doctors questions. And doctors, little by little, are giving up on that authoritarian attitude. Instead of saying my way or the highway, now they're saying we simply don't know. I was stunned to see several doctor friends of mine react that way. They used to be, had this like bravado about them, this behavior that, if you didn't go to medical school, you couldn't even be, you're not on the same level with them. They will not discuss medical topics with you. And now with more and more things coming out and turning out to be nothing more than either wishful thinking or fraud, outright fraud, now I'm starting to hear more. We just simply don't know. And I'm tying this to the protests. I think many of these people are now realizing themselves that, many of these things around us are fake. It's not just the racism. It's not just the society that's being built and it's being kept artificially at peace. Many other things are fake as well. So now I think fear is first, and then curiosity is next. And we're still at the fear stage.
Well said. I just want to take a moment to sincerely appreciate and thank the people watching live, commenting live. Again, we're very fortunate to have an audience, and this show covers so many diverse topics, and so the people that hang in there with us, that's really special, and so appreciate it. And there's no provocateurs or saboteurs in the chat, so it's really just good stuff. And so thank you guys sincerely from the bottom of my heart. Again, me solo next week, then Ray Pete. Georgie, thank you so much. You make these shows worth doing. You take 3 hours out of your day to come join me on here for really nothing in return, just to chat and talk. And so sincerely appreciate you and making these shows worth doing. So awesome.
Appreciate it.
Guys, have a great weekend. See you next week. Be safe and talk to you guys soon.
Yeah. Use those protests for something good that goes beyond civil rights. I think we have a galvanizing force that can be used for a lot of good things.
Straight from the source. Okay, bye everybody.